a poor boy named Lloyd is unceremoniously kicked out of his group of adventurers. But let's go back many days earlier. Lloyd is left speechless when he sees a woman conjure fire in the palm of her hand. She tells him to do the same, or else he'll go without dinner. So, little Lloyd tries his hardest to do as he's told. Sometime later, he returns to the same woman, promising that, after much training, he'll finally manage the feat. And when he actually manages to produce flames in his hand, his tutor offers a rare compliment, but before he can savor it, she snuffs out his fire and roasts him with a spell dozens of times stronger. According to her, he still has a long road ahead. The next day, Lloyd stomps the ground, trying to make some new technique work. When nothing happens, his instructor decides to show him how it's done. Without breaking a sweat, she opens a hole in the earth that nearly causes water to gush out. Lloyd copies her and manages to dampen the dirt, too. But as soon as he's praised again, he's immediately blasted by her magic, showing him what real water magic looks like. On another day, the little guy almost bursts a vein trying to manipulate the wind. Fed up with his antics, the teacher sends him flying with a single breath. When snow covers the land, Lloyd decides it's time to practice with this new element. Proudly, he shows his master a snowman he's made to look just like her. Not one to break tradition, she uses the very same snowman to grab him and drop him from a considerable height after magically making the snowman enormous. After digging himself out from beneath the pile, Lloyd realizes he needs more power and vows to work even harder. Then, there's the day his master is way past tipsy after a few too many bottles. Nursed by a monstrous hangover, she hears her apprentice ask if she's okay. She admits she's not at all. Lloyd, undeterred, places a hand on her forehead and prepares a healing spell. Feeling a bit better, the woman admits the boy's gotten pretty good at healing, and gives him a rare, affectionate hug. Lloyd is proud to have helped her. But there's no time to bask in it. She's already recovered and ready to dive back into magic training. Days fly by, and the young mage's training never lets up. One night, the teacher seems troubled as she gazes at a book locked away in a box. Lloyd arrives to say dinner is ready, and the woman accidentally drops the book. Lloyd picks it up to hand it back, but as he does, he's struck by some magical reaction. Realizing what's happened, his master sees that he has the potential to become a chosen one himself, probably his fate from now on. She puts the boy to bed after the shock and promises she won't let him repeat her mistakes, especially becoming overconfident just because his skills are above average. With that thought, she kisses the boy's forehead, leaving a blue mark behind. The next day, the instructor explains that a white mage is someone who uses magic for the benefit of others. Lloyd regenerates a piece of fruit and earns a compliment. But his master immediately goes further, regenerating the whole tree and bringing it back to life with her healing magic. That's one of the reasons Lloyd admires her so much. That night, she tells Lloyd that, according to what she's heard, some beastmen can use rare magic to control monsters. Lloyd's curiosity is piqued by a mention of ancient magic in the book on the table. But the teacher's expression darkens, and she says he doesn't need to learn that it's just a type of magic that's been extinct for centuries. The following day, Lloyd conjures a staff, but his teacher thinks he's way too slow. She conjures her own scepter and knocks the poor kid's legs out from under him, sending him tumbling. She explains that he needs to speed up and reminds him that, as inexperienced as he is, he must never get complacent with his training. Later that same day, the two sit at the table to continue studying. Lloyd reads about the Magistone, which his teacher explains is a crystallization of mana powerful enough to turn things nearby into Magistones. Days pass. When they finally reach a certain forest, the master takes off Lloyd's blindfold. With a wild beast lurking in the woods, the woman hands her apprentice a knife and tells him to make it home within a week. His mission: survive using only magic. The moment she leaves him, Lloyd is attacked by a giant wolf. He runs, not caring if he looks like a coward. After escaping up a tree, he realizes he can't yet defeat monsters with a white mage spells, so all he can do is keep running until he's strong enough to fight back. Looking around, he sees just how far from home he really is. Climbing down, Lloyd stores the knife with a spell and keeps moving as the sun sets. At night, he regenerates a fruit from a tree to eat and collects more to take to a cave, where he'll be safe until morning. Drawing a magic circle on the ground, the young mage plans to tweak the design a bit and channel more power into his finger to improve his skills. With the sunrise comes more hardship. Lloyd has to cross a mountain with his climbing gear, and it's no easy task. That night, he shelters in the hollow of a tree and redraws his magic circle, working to control the flow of mana. Day by day, Lloyd presses on, always seeking to sharpen his talents and his mastery of sorcery. Every night, he practices his magic circle. He also works on improving his detection magic if he doesn't. he could end up starving. By combining two circles, the young mage hopes to boost his running speed. One morning during his week-long adventure, Lloyd accidentally steps on a branch and draws the attention of a giant spider. Once again, he takes off. And when he tests out his newly improved speed circle, it actually works, letting him escape unharmed. Running flat out, Lloyd finally makes it back home but passes out before he can even knock on the door. His master soon finds him and welcomes her apprentice back. Day and night raced on, one after the other, without pause. While tidying up a room in the house, Lloyd stumbled upon a book that immediately caught his eye. The cover was a painting of a city. Just then, his master appeared, telling the kid to get back to cleaning. But Lloyd, his voice noticeably deeper and more mature now, asked if he could borrow the book. The very next day, as Lloyd was sweeping the floor, his master called on him for help with a spell that could halt the aging process. The day after that, she interrupted him while he was hanging laundry on the clothesline, asking for a hand with a healing spell. Another day, over lunch, the mage revealed she'd thought up a new enhancement magic. That night, Lloyd was forced to drink a potion that kept him awake for an entire week just so he wouldn't need to rest and could keep working. Even so, he finally managed to find a moment to take a look at the book he'd asked to borrow. The next morning, his master went to wake her student for more experiments, but his room was empty. She spotted the book with the city on the cover, lying on the table, and realized the connection. Meanwhile, young Lloyd was making his way through the forest, heading straight for the very city he'd seen on that book's cover. Once inside the city walls, the mage wandered the plaza. Wide-eyed and anxious, he'd never seen so many people together in one place before. A man carrying boxes rushed past and cursed at Lloyd for standing in the way. But all Lloyd could think was how amazing cities seemed. He traded away his last coin for a loaf of bread. But just as he was about to eat, a sudden gust of wind slapped a piece of paper against his face. The trickster responsible vanished as soon as he saw his plan succeed, leaving Lloyd to read a flyer about adventurer recruitment. Some time later, far from there, inside a shadowy dungeon, a group of warriors battled a cyclops. Lloyd was among them, awed by the intensity of the fight. The team's leader called for Sheena to cast a healing spell, while Lloyd slammed his staff to the ground and summoned a magic circle that spread across the whole battlefield. Now, everyone on the team was buffed up and ready to end the fight. First, the archer fired an arrow straight into the monster's eye. The Cyclops retaliated with a powerful punch, but the team's tank stepped in, blocking the blow, surprised at how much lighter the impact felt than she'd expected. A sorceress cast a binding spell, wrapping the Cyclops' arms and legs and giving their leader the perfect chance to finish the job with a powerful sword strike. After their victory, the tank gave Lloyd an odd look. When the group returned to the city, the whole team was greeted with cheers for defeating the Cyclops from the castle of Abadaf. But Alan the hero was by far the most celebrated. Later, when it came time to split the mission rewards, Lloyd was handed a much smaller share than the others. Alan explained that this was what a D-rank member got, and the mage didn't complain. With that settled, the leader called for a toast to their success. But Lloyd made it clear he wasn't much of a drinker and wandered away from the group. The witch grumbled about his attitude, while Alan remarked that any white mage could have taken Lloyd's place. White mages weren't all that useful in battle, and mostly there for show anyway. Meanwhile, back at Lloyd's master's house, she was visited by a man named Will, who brought news that her apprentice had been recruited by the heroes. She was glad the boy would get real training now, but worried he might become overconfident. Will asked if her regrets still lingered. Making her uneasy, she promised herself she wouldn't repeat past mistakes. Then Will recalled how, back then, the Demon Lord had sacrificed himself trying to steal that grimoire, taking many others down with him. At a crucial moment, Sybil's ancient magic had brought everyone the Demon Lord killed back to life at the cost of her own. At dawn, back in the city, a vendor was promoting a book chronicling Alan's group and their adventures. According to him, long ago, in ancient times, this world was created by the Creator, and legend had it that the heroes' trials were left behind, the national treasures of the sacred nation, the sacred swords. One of the 4 heroes chosen by these swords was Alan, the brave warrior of Ishtar. That's why all the monsters threatening the city had been defeated, one after another. Now, Alan's name echoed through the entire kingdom of Fulin and beyond. Speaking of the city's great celebrity, Alan staggered drunkenly into a room where the team's tank was reading a book on defense. Worried because lately the blows to her shield had felt odd, Alan, unconcerned, said he was feeling stronger than ever. The girl pointed out that he hadn't been training much lately, and Alan just shrugged. He figured there was no need, since he was naturally so much stronger than anyone else. Meanwhile, by a stream, 2 soldiers stood guard until they were slaughtered by a giant creature. The next day, Alan was informed that the border guards had been killed. The messenger explained that the area was also a route for black market smugglers, so it was urgent to protect the soldiers assigned there. Full of bravado, Alan insisted that taking down a few golems would be a piece of cake. Eager for action, he rallied his team and followed Lloyd, who used his search magic to guide them to a cave where, sure enough, Alan finished off a golem with a decisive strike. But then, an enemy sorcerer summoned a new golem. Lloyd quickly noticed the sorcerer was a demon. The black stone on his staff was a magistone. The tank assumes the mage is using that stone to control the golems, while Lloyd casts a magic circle to boost his allies. Once he's done, he tells Lulu to shoot the mage, so the archer fires an arrow right into the mage's chest. Immediately after, the white mage orders Mia to hand over her staff, and as soon as the witch does, the enemy mage seals the scepter. Furious, Alan makes it clear who's really in charge. He's eager to end the fight once and for all. But Lloyd warns him that without the magic stone controlling the golem, the creature's movements become completely unpredictable, making any battle extremely dangerous. Alan ignores the warning and charges straight at the giant, forcing Lloyd to rush over and push the leader out of harm's way just in time. Annoyed, Alan snaps at the kid to get out of his way, then delivers a sword strike that brings the stone creature crashing down. With the mission over, we return to the opening scene where the party leader decides to kick Lloyd out of the group. He accuses Lloyd of always hiding behind the others and leaving all the healing to Sheena. In other words, not only is Lloyd totally useless, but he's also a burden to the team. Hanging his head, the outcast admits he still lacks strength. Alan just laughs and tells the white mage to get lost. 3 days later, Lloyd is searching for a new group. After yet another failed attempt, an archer tells him they already have a white mage on their team. With each rejection, Lloyd's frustration only grows, and his luck seems to have run out. Then suddenly, he hears a girl shouting at the guild receptionist, demanding a white mage right now. The moment the staff member points Lloyd out, the adventurer sprints over like she's just found a treasure chest and grabs him by the arm. Rewinding a bit, Lloyd was wandering through the city streets, the sting of being kicked out of the group by Alan still fresh in his mind. That day, the leader had the nerve to suggest the white mage was hiding behind his teammates and leaving all the healing to Sheena. As odd as it sounds, Lloyd himself admits he wasn't all that strong back then, so he took the rejection pretty well, all things considered. On his way, Lloyd passed a fountain with a small statue of his master, which made him remember just how amazing she was. There was a time she told him he wasn't ready to handle things on his own, and now he gets it. She was right. Meanwhile, the party that was supposed to hire the white mage had gathered for a mission: infiltrate the wooden fortress of a gang called the Dirty Block. The pink-haired girl seemed confident, but even she knew this was a tough rank a quest, one that made the rest of the group uneasy. Sure, these adventurers were strong, but the enemy was huge in numbers, experienced, and incredibly organized. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. Still, the attackers hadn't come all this way for nothing. They were well coordinated too. When the mage needed cover, the archer took out her targets without missing a beat. When the warrior was about to get ambushed from behind, the tank stepped up and raised his massive shield just in time to save her. And as the cherry on top, there was a teammate in the back, always buffing her allies. With a single physical enhancement, they managed to overpower the enemy and come out on top. Realizing everything had fallen apart, the gang's surviving boss started plotting an escape, but he soon found himself cornered by the adventurers, who all wore the insignia of his rank. With nowhere left to run, the gang leader decided to go all in and summoned a giant stone golem to face the adventurers. They knew that against a rocky body like that, spells and arrows wouldn't do much, so the frontline warrior, always the first to step up, once again moved in to defend. She landed a solid sword strike to the golem's head, leaving a small crack. But it wasn't nearly enough to slow it down. Not missing a beat, she called for Clum to cast physical enchantment on her. With the spell activated, she leapt back into the fray and delivered a second, vertical blow. This time, the golem split cleanly in half, as if it were made of butter. After the dust settled, Clum apologized for losing focus during the fight, making her question whether she really belonged in such a high-level group. But the warrior reassured her, saying there was nothing to worry about. Everyone understood Clum was in a tough spot, especially with her sister Sylvie going through a rough time. In the next scene, we're back at the moment when Lloyd gets turned down by the archer at the Adventurers Guild right before the pink-haired girl comes rushing in. Desperate to find a white mage, the receptionist figured the requirements for joining an S-rank party would make it almost impossible for anyone to qualify. But the team's member was willing to take just about anyone at that point. So, Lloyd, who was just minding his business, looking for a team, gets pointed out by the staff and practically dragged out of the guild by the girl. She literally pulled him by the arm until they reached the rest of the group. Surprised to see Yui back so quickly from her hunt for a white mage, since she didn't even know the kid's name. Yui asked him to introduce himself, and Lloyd, looking a bit awkward, told them. Yui then introduced Daggers, the shield bearer; Cross, the archer; Silica, the mage, and finally, herself Yui, the leader and swordswoman. The leader welcomed the group's newest member, but Lloyd quickly clarified he'd never agreed to join. Silica piped up, saying she knew this would happen. Daggers pointed out the boss hadn't explained what was going on, and Cross suggested they should just refuse the mission since they couldn't do it without Clum. Still, Yui and the others remembered the clients really needed help, and since this was a rank-A mission, only a group of their level could even accept it, as ranked teams like theirs were rare, so the job fell to them. Lloyd was floored to learn these people were so powerful, with Alan having called him useless and weak. The white mage just couldn't see himself actually helping a team this strong, but with her usual confidence, Yui hyped him up, assuring him he could handle it. So the group asked Lloyd to show them his support magic. Feeling the pressure from all their high expectations, he started sweating so much it looked like his face was melting. His self-esteem was pretty much shot. Daggers suggested they ask for a specific spell to avoid confusing the new guy, so Yui told him to cast a buff spell on the team. Cross and Silica both noted that no ordinary white mage could pull that off and thought maybe they should just forget it. Just to be sure, Lloyd asked if that was the only test to join the party, and Yui confirmed as long as he could buff everyone at once, not one by one. Once again, the pressure mounted. Lloyd was nowhere near their level, and besides Yui, none of them really believed he could do it. Still, Lloyd took a deep breath, braced himself, and reached for his staff. Suddenly, the entire party watched in awe as his staff materialized out of thin air. Lloyd used it to summon magic circles of different colors, each moving in perfect sequence until they gathered beneath the S-rank adventurers, creating a dazzling display of lights and color. Jaw dropped, Yui asked where he'd gotten that staff. Lloyd explained it was just a storage spell, but what he really wanted to know was what his teammates thought of his buff spell. Yui is left completely confused by what he meant, since she didn't even know the enhancement had actually worked. The others try to notice any changes in themselves, but only Cross feels a little lighter. To test it out, the leader walks up to a huge tree trunk and slices it clean in half with a single swing of her sword, leaving everyone standing there with their jaws on the floor. That's when Lloyd reveals he cast 5 different spells: physical enhancement, defense boost, magic power increase, mana consumption reduction, and status ailment resistance. Casting just one spell felt too simple to him, so he figured maybe everyone was expecting something a little extra. But when he sees everyone's shocked faces, the white mage thinks he's completely messed up and apologizes for doing something so low level, then starts to walk away, convinced he's not the right guy for this team. But Yui and the others quickly call him back, realizing he's misunderstood everything. Not long after, Lloyd tells everyone that he was once part of the legendary group made up of the only 4 heroes in the world, but he got kicked out for not being skilled enough. Silica admits she's never seen anyone cast so many enhancements at once like Lloyd just did, but the boy insists there are tons of white mages at his level kick any random tree and 5 just like him will fall out. Cross just has to ask where Lloyd gets this bargain bin self-esteem, while Lloyd recommends they try to get back the white mage who used to be in their group. About that, they explain Clum has a little sister who's sick, and Clum would care for her every day while still trying to go on adventures. The constant exhaustion wore down her health so much that it started affecting her work. On a mission the other day, the poor girl simply collapsed, so she decided to leave the group herself, thinking she was just causing trouble. Normally, this wouldn't be such a problem for most quests, but facing a rank challenge without a white mage, not the smartest move, which is why they're out searching for someone who fits the bill. Seeing how much the others still respect Clum, even though she's not in the group anymore, Lloyd feels a twinge of envy and asks about her little sister's illness. They admit they don't know much, but it seems to be some disease that turns the entire body into Magistone. Right then, Lloyd remembers a lesson he had from his old mentor about this. She'd explained that Magistone is a crystallization of mana, and its power tends to transform anything around it into Magistone as well. On that day, Lloyd asked her if there was any way to cure it. Thinking about it now, he asks to be taken to Clum's house. Sometime later, the white mage arrives at the former teammate's home with the current leader by his side. He cuts straight to the point, asking about Clum's younger sister. Clum explains that she used to adventure with Sylvie, her sister, but Sylvie suffered an injury in the middle of a battle that left her unconscious. To check her symptoms, Lloyd is led to the bedroom where Sylvie is resting. As soon as the door opens, he feels an overwhelming dark mana fill the entire room. Clum pulls back the blanket to reveal her sister's body, slowly being overtaken by Magistone. Lloyd says that if his theory is right, he can cure her. Clum, still in disbelief, points out that even advanced mages couldn't pull this off, but Lloyd's confident. He explains that the cause might have been a cut Sylvie suffered from a highly pure Magistone. He asks if she got hurt in a mana-rich cave, and Clum confirms they were on a mission to extract Magistone, and her sister got cut on her side. Seeing this, Lloyd realizes exactly what happened. Mana entered the wound and spread throughout her body, just like his mentor taught him. Regardless of who this kid or his teacher might be, Plum is desperate to save her sister and lets the young mage go ahead with his attempt at healing. Lloyd approaches the patient, raises his staff, and emits a light that clashes with the dark mana wrapped around Sylvie's body. The pressure is so intense he has to pause for a moment. He explains that he's using a reversed version of the mana transfer spell, drawing mana out of Sylvie, and thus reconfiguring the spell. He says the transformation to Magistone progresses because the mana is out of control, so he needs to lower it as close to zero as possible. If he can't remove that mana, any treatment will be useless. Now Lloyd starts using healing magic as well. But not just any healing spell, a broken version that consumes almost no mana, letting him absorb even more of Sylvie's mana while healing her at the same time. In the middle of all this, Yui asks if this is something hard to do, and Clum replies that hard doesn't even begin to describe it. What this mage is doing using spells he created himself and casting 2 types of magic at once is already impressive enough. But what's truly astonishing is that Lloyd has the resilience and willpower to withstand so much mana passing through him. There's no way any ordinary person could manage that. Eventually, the healing process keeps going, and Yui watches in awe as the parts of Sylvie's body that were turning into Magistones start to return to normal. Soon, when her body is completely restored, Lloyd stops the procedure and starts gasping for breath, completely exhausted. Sylvie finally wakes up to see her sister's tearful face by her side, which brings a smile to both Lloyd and Yui. After this miraculous and dangerous ordeal, Clum sincerely thanks Lloyd for his help, promising she'll go back to adventuring with her sister once Sylvie is truly well again. Before Lloyd leaves, Clum tells him she's confident he can lead the group, since he's proven what he's capable of. Even so, Lloyd reminds her he's not an official member after all, he's just not skilled enough for that. At night, the S-rank team gathers once again to hear the good news. Sylvie, Clum's sister, has finally been cured of her terrible Magistone condition. All thanks to the rookie white mage who turned out to be far more talented than anyone expected. Despite this incredible feat, Lloyd remains humble, insisting he didn't do anything special. On top of that, he can't help but feel a little down that Clum hasn't come back to the group. Still, the team is just happy their friend is getting a fresh start, which makes Lloyd acutely aware of how different things are from the awful way he was treated by his previous team. As the celebration goes on, Daggers throws out a question. If you could be reborn, what would you want to be? Silica admits she'd like to get married. Yui says the same, but adds she wants to become a great hero together with this team. Out of nowhere, Lloyd suddenly cuts in and asks if he can join the group. Instantly, it's clear everyone is on board with their new teammate, and the leader suggests they throw a welcome party for him. True to his modest nature, the white mage doesn't think that's necessary, but Yui basically forces him to go along with it. Seeing this, the others tease her, saying she just wants an excuse to drink like crazy. And Yui starts arguing with everyone, insisting that's not the case at all. Without wasting any time, the team gathers for the celebration, and Lloyd is moved by the feast his teammates have put together for him. Without overdoing the humility, he digs in with real enthusiasm, not turning down a single dish. He compliments the quality of the local food, but the others can't quite figure out why after all. This restaurant is just so-so by the town's standards. Still, considering the flavors in each dish, Lloyd remembers things weren't always like this when he was younger. Back in the days when he trained with his master. Curious, his friends ask what he means, so he explains he had a tutor who taught him magic, and she used to cook with nothing but garden herbs and wild mushrooms. Meat was a rare treat. Now everyone wants to know what kind of person his master was, and Lloyd shares that she specialized in offensive magic. In fact, it wasn't unusual for her to accidentally set off the odd explosion with her crazy experiments. Still, she taught him a few support spells, since she was far more skilled than he was in every way. Excited by that description, Silica thinks about asking this mage for some tips herself one day, but Lloyd immediately warns her that doing so means putting your life on the line every day. Cross figures she must have been pretty strict, but Lloyd admits she also had a gentle side. For all her clumsiness and reckless ways, she had a kindness that really shone through. At that point, the team leader announces it's time to talk strategy. But before anything else, everyone agrees the new guy needs to be brought up to speed on the mission details. Yui, terrible at explaining things, tries to pass the responsibility to Daggers, who points out that technically, she's the team leader, but since she's dodging, he'll take over. So, the shield bearer lays it out. The goal is to wipe out groups of monsters that have been destroying farms in the area. Apparently, it's not just one kind of creature behind the attacks, but all sorts of different races banding together, which is something adventurers have never seen before. Since they're up against so many enemies, Cross admits he and Yui will have a tough time, and the captain adds that, in moments like these, they really rely on Silica's area spells. Even so, the mage points out she can't run out of mana during a crucial battle, so she'll need the others to help her save energy. That's when Yui asks if Lloyd can use offensive magic. He says yes, though his spells aren't as strong as his support magic. Daggers goes ahead and assigns everyone's roles. He and Yui will draw the monster's attention first, giving Silica a chance to blast them all at once. At the same time, Cross will hang back to protect both her and Lloyd, who'll be supporting with buffs and healing. Silica confesses she's excited to see Lloyd's support magic in action, but he makes it clear they shouldn't expect anything too spectacular. That statement obviously dampens the team's hopes a bit. Yui even tells him he ought to have a little more confidence, but he reminds them he was kicked out of the hero squad for lack of skill. Cross, for his part, says he'd take Lloyd over some arrogant jerk any day, and the rest of the team agrees. Leaving the tavern, everyone promises to meet again at the inn the next morning. The 4 veterans head off together, while Lloyd goes his own way. Daggers asks where he's going, since the hotel's in the other direction, and Lloyd sheepishly admits he doesn't have the money to pay for a room. So, the tank tosses him a pouch of coins as an advance for the missions they'll be doing together. Grateful for yet another sign of trust, Lloyd promises to earn every coin, and the shield bearer says that's exactly what he expects from the white mage. That night, back in his room, Lloyd reflects on how kind everyone on this team is and resolves to work hard to repay their kindness. The next day, they all meet up and wait for Yui to come out of her house. She's got a backpack on, unlike the others, and asks why nobody else is carrying one. Cross explains that Lloyd used his storage magic for everyone, meaning he can magically carry all their gear. Yui gets excited and hands her stuff over to the white mage, who uses his staff to stash her things, leaving the leader amazed that carrying heavy loads on the road won't be a problem anymore. Lloyd even offers to teach the trick to the others, who had no idea they could learn it too. According to him, everyone is born with at least a little mana, so with some practice, anyone can do the same. Feeling much lighter, the team heads out toward the farms in high spirits. Once they reach a certain area, Daggers points out that just past these mountains lies the Megocracy, the land of the demons. Right now, they're keeping a low profile, but who knows when they'll make another move to conquer the continent, since that's always their goal. A little further on, the group comes across a terrifying bridge where a fall means certain death. To break the tension, Yui distracts everyone with a question. When you need to come up with something on the spot to get through a tough time, what do you do with water? The others start tossing out answers. I boil it, I spill it, I freeze it, I toss it, I drink it, I pour it over my head. Seeing Lloyd is lost, the captain tells him to join in with his own silly answer. He laments that it's not the kind of skill he picked up from his mentor. So Cross explains the whole point is just to say something goofy on purpose and laugh about being wrong, while Yui says it's their way of keeping their minds relaxed on long journeys. Honestly, Lloyd doesn't really get why they do it. So she says that, even if the mission's tough, staying tense the whole time will just wear everyone out. Then, she hits them with another question. When you split the spoils of a hunt, you divide them evenly? But what do you call someone who forges a completely new path? The 3 most experienced teammates quickly chime in. Trail Cutter, Pathfinder, and Trail Sharer. Left as the last to answer, Lloyd racks his brain for something to say and blurts out, "I've walked a tough path." His friends don't think much of it, but at least he's playing along with the spirit of the game, and that's good enough. Meanwhile, deep in a forest, a hooded figure kneels in prayer before a black stone radiating chaotic energy. Back with the group, since they're not hauling heavy packs, they reach the campsite earlier than expected. It doesn't take long to pitch the tents and set up the fire for their meal. Yui asks if she can bathe now, but Daggers reminds her they still need to gather firewood and look for food. Hearing that, Lloyd volunteers to fetch some wood, giving Yui the chance to drag Silica toward the water. A little while later, after picking up some branches off the ground, Lloyd figures he's found enough to head back. As he stows the wood away, he spots some fruits just like the ones his master once grew with magic, so he bites into one and decides to take a bunch back for the group. Suddenly, he hears a girl scream and rushes toward the sound. At the river, where Yui and Silica were bathing, a huge aquatic creature appears menacingly. Lloyd recognizes it instantly a basilisk. With the advantage of being in the water, the serpent surges toward the girls, its speed making it impossible for them to escape. They try to retreat as far as they can, but honestly, it's a hopeless effort. Just in time, Lloyd gets close enough to cast an offensive spell at the basilisk, drawing its attention and letting the girls swim to safety. He quickly pulls their weapons out of storage and tosses them over, then gives them both a support spell to help in the fight. As the basilisk lunges at Lloyd, Yui darts forward and slices the beast in half. But even wounded, it refuses to go down without a fight. Seeing the battle isn't over, Silica conjures a fireball and incinerates the creature in a burst of flames. Amid Yui's wild excitement, Silica tries to figure out where she got that much firepower. Their captain thanks the white mage for his help. If it weren't for him, they would have been snake food. As she asks him to put her sword away, she gestures toward the far bank where the scabbard was left. But the motion makes her towel slip off, and she lets out an earth-shattering scream, completely exposed. Later, the team gathers to learn the storage magic. But Yui can't even look anyone in the eye. With a big red handprint on his cheek, Lloyd explains that you just have to create an opening between your palms and put something inside. Honestly, no one really gets it, but they give it a shot anyway. Seeing this isn't getting them anywhere, Lloyd apologizes for not being a better teacher and for being so useless. Daggers tells him not to be so hard on himself, and Cross reminds everyone they're all beginners when it comes to this stuff. Noticing how understanding his friends are, Lloyd finally cracks a smile. Silica gets the idea to say the word storage aloud, and, just like that, magic happens in her hands. Turns out, all they needed was a spell. They're not like Lloyd. By late afternoon, thanks to the new technique, Silica manages to store her staff and gets a round of compliments. Cross tries to do the same with his gear, but only manages to put away half of it. When night falls, the team's white mage sits by the fire while Yui keeps an eye out, noting there are no monsters around. Sensing her mood, Lloyd asks if something's wrong, so she sits down and thanks him for joining the group. He says there's no need, he was in trouble and looking for work anyway. Even so, the captain feels like she forced him onto the team after showing so much concern for their client on this mission. Lloyd asks why she's so invested in this mission, and she confides that it reminds her of her hometown. When Yui was a child, monsters attacked her village, and she was the only survivor, so she couldn't just turn a blind eye when she heard about monsters attacking farms. Plus, smaller settlements would be in serious trouble if they lost their food supplies. In the middle of her story, Lloyd asks her to be quiet and wake the others while he grabs his staff. Once everyone is up, the team hides among the trees to watch a group of giant spiders powlerks crossing an area of the forest. Matching the description from their quest, the spiders loop around and start moving toward the group. The adventurers try to retreat quietly, but Yui steps on a branch, alerting the monsters, who immediately give chase. Naturally, the humans run too, but one of the powlerks makes a huge leap, landing right in front of them, giving the other two time to surround the group. Quickly, everyone summons their stored weapons and tries to block the spider's web attacks. Silica, however, gets her staff stuck to a tree with webbing, and before they know it, the whole battlefield is covered in silk, making things harder by the second. In desperation, Daggers asks what they should do, and Lloyd announces he'll make their legs stop moving. Wielding his staff, the white mage conjures several magic circles and tells Yui to go on the offensive. As Daggers blocks another web shot, the swordswoman leaps over him and slashes through a wall of webs that was pinning the team down. With the way clear, Cross jumps into the tree where Silica's staff is stuck and manages to return her weapon. Yui raises her scabbard to shield herself from the powlerk's web shot, bracing against the impact. Using that opening, she rushes in and slices the monster's legs. The second enemy steps up to face her, but meets the same fate, left sprawled and motionless on the ground. Then, as the second powlerk fires its web, Yui uses the force to propel herself straight toward the third spider, gaining just enough momentum to cut off two of its legs in a single strike. Silica jumps in, unleashing a flurry of fireballs. At the same time, Cross fires arrows through each one, triggering an explosion of flames as they hit the spider. With the battle won, Lloyd apologizes to the group for giving orders, but Daggers assures him it was actually a huge help. The white mage has the skill and knowledge for it. In fact, Yui makes it clear that from now on, they're counting on Lloyd to take charge, and the others seem to agree, all but naming him the team's new leader. The next morning, the group breaks camp. Each member packs up their own gear, handling the storage magic themselves. As the others set off, Lloyd finds himself wondering why there were powlerks in this area and where they might be headed. But before he can dwell on it, Yui calls out to him, and he hurries to rejoin the group. At night, when the team set up another camp to spend the night, Lloyd couldn't stop thinking about those creatures' strange behavior. It looked like the entire pack was headed to the same place. Yui interrupted the mage's thoughts to ask if he was going to take the night watch alone again. When he said yes, Silica chimed in, warning that he was going to ruin his health if he kept this up night after night. Lloyd insisted on standing guard so the others could save their strength. Besides, he was used to sleepless nights, and since he was still inexperienced, this was the only way he could really help out. Yui started to grumble that the white mage was more important than he thought. But Silica saw that Lloyd wouldn't budge and decided to let him do as he wished as long as he promised to speak up if it became too much. The next day, as the group continued their journey on foot, The swordswoman kept glancing over at Lloyd for some reason. At one point, she noticed he was able to use a detection spell to sense enemies nearby, a pretty advanced magic. Lloyd, however, didn't think much of it. Since his spell couldn't even scan that large an area, he planned to keep casting detection spells at regular intervals to make sure the surroundings were safe, which should help them avoid any surprise monster attacks. Yui worried that this routine might wear him out, but Lloyd assured her he was fine. With a hopeful look, she asked if there was any way she could help, but when he said no, she felt embarrassed and had to admit there was nothing more she could do. That night, while Lloyd was once again keeping watch by the campfire, the group's leader asked Silica if that guy just didn't trust the rest of the team. Sure, he was helpful and always willing, but he never seemed to rely on his companions for anything. Silica explained that everyone had their own pace. She reminded the leader that she and Yui hadn't been that close at first either. Lloyd probably had some self-esteem issues, which made it hard for him to connect with others. He just needed time and space to adjust in his own way. Yui remarked that Lloyd was a real mystery. He didn't know much about ordinary things, but he seemed to know a lot about other stuff. That just made her even more curious about what kind of life he'd led so far. As for that, Silica was certain Lloyd would share his story with them one day, as long as they didn't rush him and gave him the space he needed. The warrior agreed, but wasn't entirely convinced. With someone as unusual as Lloyd, everything might turn out the opposite of what they expected. Speaking of Lloyd, Daggers came over and asked the mage to take a walk with him. Lloyd said he couldn't leave his post, but Cross showed up and offered to take over for him. A few hours later, Daggers finished his work and showed Lloyd the series of bells he'd strung throughout the forest, perfect for alerting them if a monster passed by. With that done, he told Lloyd he could get some rest for the night, but Lloyd refused, feeling like he still had to stand guard. Daggers explained that's exactly what the team had done before the white mage joined them. Lloyd really didn't need to worry. Still unconvinced, Lloyd argued that he wouldn't be able to use his detection magic if he fell asleep. So Daggers got more direct, asking outright if Lloyd didn't trust the team. Caught off guard, Lloyd insisted it was just about being careful, not trust. But Daggers pointed out that Lloyd always took on the job of detection and night watch alone, without including anyone else. It made the others feel like he didn't trust them. That comment made Lloyd remember his old mentor, who'd always said how inexperienced he was, and Alan, who'd called him useless. With those words echoing in his mind, Lloyd stressed that he just didn't want to be a burden to the team. Daggers replied that Lloyd should go ahead and be a burden, because that's what teams are for, to make sure no one has to face every hardship alone. Honestly, the team fully expected Lloyd to make mistakes, but if he did, Daggers wanted him to know that he could count on his friends. Embarrassed, Lloyd realized he'd never even considered that, which made Daggers wonder where this guy had come from. Lloyd hesitated, asking if it was really okay for someone as weak as him to depend on others. But Daggers reassured him no one in the group thought the support mage lacked talent. With that, he invited Lloyd to get some sleep, since they had an early start the next day. Before drifting off, Lloyd thought about everything he'd heard and found himself liking the idea of having friends who actually cared about him. At dawn, Yui stretched like a cat until Lloyd came over and, after a moment's hesitation, asked if she could help him fetch some water. Of course, she agreed, and the rest of the team watched the scene unfold, smiles on their faces. Elsewhere, inside a mansion, a hooded servant informed his master that he would file his report once he and the others finished placing the mage stones at the designated coordinates. The master replied that, with that done, the path was open. He asked about the high-level adventurers operating in Ishtar, and the servant said that the monsters they'd gathered had flooded the adventurers with requests. So most of them were now out of the city, which had been the plan all along. Those who stayed behind were all low level, along with the hero's party. The boss wished he could get rid of that last group, too. But unfortunately, the hero only acted at the kingdom's request. Either way, it would be interesting to see what this team could do alone at the heart of the storm. With that, the servant was told to notify the client that it was time, and took his leave of Lord Michel. Back with the S-rank group, Yui started to sense that something was off in the forest as they made their way through it. The rest of the team agreed there was something strange in the air, especially when Cross pointed out that they hadn't run into a single monster since entering this deep part of the woods. Yui asks if Lloyd did anything with his magic, but he says no. He's been using his detection spell periodically, but that doesn't actually keep the monsters away. Speaking of which, he expands his search radius and spots a pack of monsters about 10 miles ahead. Checking the map, Cross realizes that direction puts them right near the farm where the group is headed. Yui raises an eyebrow. Didn't Lloyd say he couldn't scan that large an area? Lloyd admits that 10 miles doesn't feel like much to him. Silica points out that's 10 times more than average, But even though everyone's a little freaked out by the white mage's power, the team tries to keep calm and focus on the situation at hand. 10 miles later, they arrive at the mission's farm. And sure enough, there's a massive pack of dire wolves surrounding the place. But that's not what catches Lloyd's attention. What really stands out is the fact that this is the only spot his search magic is picking up any monsters at all. So, where did all the others go? Silica and the others agree it's seriously weird. There should be plenty of other creatures as strong as these wolves in the area. So it's not like the wolves just wiped out all the competition. Lloyd asks where the current owner of the farm is, and Yui says she heard he was injured by a dire wolf and is staying at his son's place in town. Suddenly, Cross points out something black and ominous in the middle of the farm, but no one else can see it. His eyesight is way better than the rest of the group's. Taking that into account, Lloyd casts a spell to enhance his own vision, and now he can see it, a magic stone radiating dark energy. He quickly uses the same spell on the others so they can see it too, and after a quick analysis, the white mage starts to believe that the shadowy mist swirling around the stone is beastfolk mana. Lloyd remembers his mentor mentioning that there are beastmen capable of using a rare magic to command monsters, and it sure seems like this magic stone is behind what's happening at the farm. Just then, Lloyd detects another wave of monsters heading their way, more than 1,000 creatures from all sorts of species. At that point, the boy is sure everything is connected to that giant magic stone, which must have the power to attract beasts. He wonders if someone is trying to get rid of them, but decides that would be way too indirect if that were the case. Cross thinks they should fall back, but Yui refuses. If they retreat, the monsters will destroy every field in the area. The archer asks if she really plans to take on 1,000 monsters at once, and she falls silent. On the other hand, Daggers doubts they could even escape from so many enemies, and Silica adds that if the monsters chase them, and there's a battle near town, the townspeople could be in serious danger. Finally, Lloyd decides the best move is to fight, and he's already got a plan. First step, deal with that magic stone. He asks the archer if he can hit it from here. Cross figures he probably can, but doubts he can destroy it. Lloyd says that's fine, it'll be enough. So Cross readies his bow. At the same time, the support mage provides a boost to make up for the lack of firepower. And when the arrow flies with the added buff, it's enough to shatter the magic stone. Impressed, Cross asks what Lloyd just did, and Lloyd explains that he simply cast enhancement magic on the archer, the bow, and the arrows. Cross can't believe the guy can buff people and weapons at the same time. But once again, Lloyd just thought that was standard procedure. Besides, he only cast the spell. The real skill was Cross nailing a shot from that distance. Immediately, the group watches as the wolves revert to their natural ferocity after the stone shatters, turning on each other and starting to fight. Yui asks if Lloyd expected that when he decided to break the magic stone. He says it was obvious that thing was manipulating the beast's behavior. On the other hand, he'd also thought it was controlling the approaching horde, but apparently not, since that enormous mass of monsters is still closing in at full speed. And then, the horde finally draws dangerously close to the 4 humans standing against it. Since the white mage claimed he could tank the beasts, Yui tells him it's time to do something. But he replies that the timing still isn't right. The rest of the team starts to get seriously nervous in the face of such a threat, while the mage stays calm, waiting for the perfect moment. So, when 3 wolves lunge at Silica, Lloyd tells her to react. She fires back with a firestorm spell. Even she's amazed at how intense her magic is. She's never seen anything that powerful come from her staff before. Yui demands to know what kind of sorcery Lloyd pulled off, and he explains he just used magic power boost and mana cost reduction on her. The firestorm rages across the land, engulfing the horde in flames, but Lloyd tells Silica to cast it again, and then follow up with a wind spell. Cross realizes that the flames and the monsters will keep burning after the wind magic fans the fire. Plus, the smoke will make it harder for the flying monsters to see. Next, Lloyd initiates a telepathy spell with the archer to share the exact enemy positions he's detected. With their locations clear in his mind, Cross is able to ignore the smoke and land pinpoint shots on the winged beasts swooping down from above. Up to this point, everything's going according to plan, but Lloyd isn't one to leave things to chance, so he stays in command, making sure they wrap this up. He tells Silica it's time for the final phase, and she warns him her mana is almost gone. So the boy places his hand on hers and performs a mana transfer. The whole ordeal was so intense it left Lloyd completely dazed. He'd poured so much magic energy into his ally that he felt drained himself. But still, he told her to focus back on the fight. Silica raised her staff and cast Luvia, unleashing a powerful downpour that snuffed out the fire before it could spiral out of control, drenching the entire forest. After pulling off such a powerful spell, the mage was out of mana for good. She lost control of her body and just collapsed. Luckily, Daggers was there to catch her before she hit the ground. Yui assured her friend that they'd handle the rest. Silica, struggling to even speak, told them not to push themselves too hard. The swordswoman couldn't help but laugh at the irony, hearing that from someone who had nearly passed out from trying too hard herself. Putting that aside, Yui pointed out that Lloyd had been brilliant for coming up with a plan like that. But, true to his rock-bottom self-esteem, Lloyd just shrugged it off and said he hadn't done anything special, just what any support should do. Seeing there was no changing this guy's mind, Yui gave up on the pep talk and drew her sword, ready to finish the job. Daggers hoisted his shield, moving to stand by her side as they squared up for the next round. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Silica lay back on the grass, exhausted, as if they'd just climbed Mount Everest. Frustrated that he was worn out from just this, Lloyd realized he still had a long road ahead of him. A moment later, a beastwoman lets out a terrified scream after being grabbed by a demon. A beastman, who looks a lot like her, dashes in to save her, but he can't catch the attacker. Frustrated, he unleashes a furious roar, vowing that the demon will pay for what he's done. Meanwhile, back with the group of adventurers, Lloyd, having recovered from his exhaustion, comes to a realization. Whoever's behind all of this is targeting Ishtar, which means they've all been deceived. As they set out again, the white mage conjures up several vials filled with a purple liquid, emphasizing that this mission was probably a trap from the start. By sending high-level adventurers away on previous missions, their enemies were actually drawing them away from Ishtar, weakening the city's defenses. Cross argues that Ishtar still has the hero and the knights to protect it, but Daggers admits that Lloyd's deduction is starting to make too much sense. Either way, the archer reminds everyone that the Magistone they saw earlier was strange too, and the whole group agrees the city might be in danger, and they need to head back immediately. So, Lloyd packs away the box of potions after drinking one himself, then casts a support spell on his allies. Suddenly, he takes off at an inhuman speed, leaving his friends in awe. Without really understanding what's going on, they all bolt after him, feeling light as feathers. On the way, Lloyd explains that he simply cast a speed boost spell on everyone. Elsewhere, back at the secluded mansion, the demon who kidnapped the beastwoman arrives. Michelle welcomes her esteemed client, but the visitor asks not to be called that. The host just laughs and says that Great General Grist sounds way too formal anyway. Grist then warns that the vanguard is closing in on Ishtar, and that their plan is working, all thanks to that woman. Speaking of which, he hopes she'll be useful in the future too. Michelle agrees she's a special one, and they stand to gain a lot by using her. Grist doesn't quite get what he means by that, but considering people once called him the Demon Lord's right-hand man, the least he can do is trust his talent. As for the rest, the man insists he can do anything as long as he's paid well for it. Meanwhile, the beast girl who was kidnapped is now locked up in a cell. Michelle appears with a box of potions, announcing that it's time to borrow her power. He then uses a machine to manipulate a black magistone and set his wicked plan in motion. Back in the forest, Lloyd and his group are racing toward the city of Ishtar. After a long run, they stop to catch their breath. Lloyd summons the same box of purple potions and hands one to each person. Silica worries the mage will run out of mana if he keeps buffing everyone all the way to Ishtar, but he assures her he's gotten so much practice that he barely uses any magical energy. Impressed, she asks if he's done this many times before, and he just shrugs. It's something you get used to after a while. According to the white mage, a long time ago, his mentor dumped him in a forest far from civilization and made him find his way home alone as training. For a white mage, fighting monsters alone is nearly impossible. Running away was all he could do. To survive, Lloyd had to use every type of enhancement magic he knew, and that training was nothing short of hell for the young mage. Yui comments that he really went through the ringer as a kid, but Lloyd just considers himself inexperienced. He's convinced it was a normal form of training, especially since his mentor was always scolding him. Either way, in his mind, it ended up being a pretty effective method. Yui and Silica completely disagree, insisting Lloyd's training was neither normal nor healthy. That gets him thinking maybe, just maybe, he hasn't trained enough. After all, he's traveling with a team of S-rank adventurers while he's nowhere near that level, and he feels like he needs to work even harder to catch up. The girls sigh, lamenting that the guys gotta screw loose, but decide not to push it any further. As the saying goes, it takes one lunatic to understand another. Finally, Daggers calls everyone back to the road, and the white mage does what he does best. He layers enhancement spells together, which ends up triggering a detection spell to sense for possible enemies nearby. Hours later, they've already made their way through the thick forest and are closing in on Ishtar. The girls in the group praise how fast they've been able to travel without ever losing their breath until Lloyd, without warning, slams on the brakes, causing a pile-up with all his teammates. After rolling to a very undignified stop, Cross demands to know why he stopped so suddenly. Lloyd explains that his detection spell picked something up, not that he knows exactly what. but the feeling is so ominous that he has a terrible sense of foreboding. The white mage asks the others to continue on to Ishtar while he checks out the situation himself. Yui offers to go with him, since this could turn into a real fight and a white mage shouldn't go in alone. The rest of the team quickly insists on joining too. Nobody wants to leave their friend to face the unknown by himself. Meanwhile, 4 figures in black robes gather around a magical artifact to demonstrate their power once again. Sometime later, as night falls, Lloyd and his companions reach a cabin. He can sense demons nearby, along with someone of a different race. Yui, worried, asks if he means demons from the Megocracy, which he confirms. Before they'd headed out here, Daggers had mentioned that beyond these steep mountains lay the Megocracy, the nation of demons. According to the tank, that race has been hiding out lately, but could emerge at any moment to try and conquer the continent. Lloyd remembers that demons are supposed to be strictly forbidden from entering the 3 main nations of the continent. But Yui points out that the Megocracy isn't exactly known for respecting rules, they're famous for leading violent invasions. She also asks if Lloyd has any memories of the Megocracy from when he was younger. But he says he remembers nothing from his childhood. The war was already over by the time he went to live with his mentor. Silica realizes the mage is a war orphan, while Yui apologizes for suggesting Lloyd didn't care. But the mage isn't bothered by that. He's much more concerned about the possibility of demons invading the cabin right in front of them. Cross suggests they should report this to the knights once they're back in town. But the mage wants to gather more information before leaving. Even though it's dangerous, Lloyd can sense that same mana from the Magistone, and Daggers thinks it might be related to those monsters that attacked the farm. Lloyd agrees, adding that if Ishtar is their real target, then it's worth the risk to investigate further. Yui agrees they need to keep a close watch, though Silica isn't happy about it, but the warrior insists they have to stop any possible invaders from threatening Ishtar, since the city is already under threat. The rest of the group is impressed by her leadership, and they all agree that this might be the key to resolving the situation. With everyone on board, the group quietly approaches the cabin. Cross peers through the window, but it seems empty inside. At that, Lloyd casts his detection spell again and senses the enemy presence underground. He asks Silica to use her earth magic and give the party a buff. Silica conjures the sandbox and collapses the ceiling right on top of the hooded figures gathered below. Yui wastes no time. She bursts in and takes down the first man. She demands to know who they are and what they're doing in this nation. But one of the men reacts, lifting the fallen stones with magic and hurling them at her. She's quick, deflecting the rocks with her sword. Cross fires an arrow, hitting the attacker just as his ally tries to escape. Lloyd buffs Silica, who casts the sandbox again to keep up the offensive. Another enemy retaliates with more levitation magic, launching the rocks back with force. Daggers jumps in to shield everyone with his shield, and seeing their attacks aren't working, the hooded figures start to panic and flee. Yui chases after one of the escapees, only to run right into an ambush, but Cross covers her with his bow, taking down 2 more enemies before they can harm her. Now, only one remains. The last one runs over to the Beastwoman prisoner and casts a spell that wraps her in some sort of cocoon, then begins levitating her out of there. But the adventurers rush in to set things straight. The man dashes up the stairs, and Lloyd tells Yui to circle around and cut him off, as she sprints to intercept and calls for Cross to help. The mage picks up on a powerful magical signature coming from inside the cocoon. Before long, Yui and the group's archer manage to corner the fugitive. But he doesn't surrender. He unleashes a flurry of lightning bolts instead. Lloyd throws up magical shields to protect everyone, until finally one of the bolts hits the caster himself, knocking him out. With the threat neutralized, Lloyd dispels the cocoon and discovers the prisoner is a beastwoman. The adventurers quickly bring her inside the cabin. Silica guesses she must be from the Fora's empire, judging by her features. Everyone assumes she can shed some light on what's happening, so they have Lloyd try to revive her. The mage casts an exceptionally powerful healing spell, the same one Yui saw cure Sylvie before she turned to Magistone. On top of that, Lloyd says he's improved the spell since then. Yui is shocked. She had no idea adventurers could actually improve magic like that, leaving Lloyd a bit baffled by her reaction. Silica, equally surprised, agrees being able to alter a spell is incredible. Lloyd explains that his mentor often forced him to help with things like that. He remembers all too well every 5 minutes she'd come up with something new, asking him to help with her spells to stop aging, cure baldness, or treat athlete's foot. Day by day, Lloyd's more convinced his master is downright eccentric. Yui, on the other hand, doesn't think that word even begins to cover what that woman is really like. Either way, the healing works, and the beastwoman wakes up. Yui, barely able to contain her excitement, starts firing questions at the poor woman about the situation. Eventually, she reveals her name, Kiriha. The human asks why she was kept captive by those demons, but Kiriha seems too frightened to answer right away. Seeing this, Lloyd explains that they're adventurers, sent on a mission to protect a farm from a monster horde, and that he sensed the mana of a beastfolk nearby. From what he's heard, some beastfolk can control monsters through magic, and maybe, just maybe, Kiriha was responsible for what happened at the farm. At that, Kiriha confesses it was her spell that caused the whole mess. Meanwhile, out in the forest, two Ishtar scouts stumble upon a gigantic magistone and realize that a huge number of creatures are lurking in the woods, guarding the object. With no hope of fighting, they turn to flee only for one to be taken down instantly by vicious wolves. At the same time, an army of creatures begins to march through the forest toward the city. Back at the cabin, the adventurers are stunned to learn there really is a spell capable of controlling monsters. Kiriha confirms the demons forced her to use that power, turning it into a weapon which all but confirms that the Magocracy is behind the attack on Ishtar, since the city is a crucial strategic point for conquering the whole continent. The big issue now is that, if the demons' plan was to leave the city's defenses wide open, Ishtar might already be in serious danger. Given the circumstances, the group rushes back toward Ishtar with Kiriha joining them. Lloyd feels bad for dragging her into all this, but she admits she'd be in even bigger trouble if they left her behind. After some time running, they stop for a quick break, all anxious to reach the city before it falls to the looming threat at its gates. Lloyd uses his detection magic and senses a monster horde heading for the city. But that's not all. There's a massive army coming right behind them. Yui turns to the mage and asks what they should do next. In response, he asks to borrow Kiriha's power. At the same time, he tells the others to warn the town about the looming danger and get ready for what's coming. Yui threatens to protest the decision, but Lloyd points out that no one person can handle two things at once and reassures her that everything will work out as long as they work together. Bolstered by his words, the group quickly grasps how serious things are. The white mage then casts an enhancement spell to make the allies' perilous journey a little easier. With that, Yui, Daggers, Cross, and Silica set out for Ishtar, while Lloyd and Kiriha head off to pursue their own mission. Meanwhile, back at his group's mansion, Alan was furious. Every single candidate for recruitment was terrible. In his opinion, these guys were even more useless than that piece of trash, especially since none of them even used storage magic. Mia complained that their limit was just 2 enhancement spells at once. The rest of the group began to wonder if maybe Lloyd was actually exceptional, and the leader had simply never seen it. Still, Alan stubbornly insisted that the kid was nothing special. In the middle of all this, a royal knight stepped into the office to deliver news from a patrol in the forest. At that moment, a horde of over 10,000 monsters was advancing toward Ishtar, and the army needed their group of adventurers to help form the defensive lines. Hearing this, Alan saw a golden opportunity to make a name for himself. He ordered word sent to the troops that they'd be ready for battle soon, especially since it was a royal request, and now he could finally prove he was the most powerful warrior in the kingdom. Meanwhile, not far away, Lloyd and Yui were already keeping an eye on that massive horde. To the support mage, it even looked bigger than the one marching toward Ishtar. If a horde this large joined the main force, Ishtar wouldn't stand a chance. That's why they'd made the right call in moving ahead to decide on a plan. From here on out, the goal was simple: find a way to defeat these enemies. Kiriha, however, wanted to know if there was any way to do it without harming the monsters, since they were being controlled and not acting on their own. What made it worse was that the one controlling them was using beastfolk powers, something that weighed heavily on her conscience. Seeing her worry, the man promised to find a way to avoid hurting them as much as possible. After all, it's always better to solve things without needless violence. With that in mind, he asked if it was possible for Kiriha to use her magic to send the monsters back home. She explained that probably not, there were simply too many. In that case, the mage suggested boosting her magic to try it anyway. She agreed to give it a shot. The support mage began preparing his buff to enhance her power, but her spell ended up being blocked. That's when she realized something in the forest was interfering. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Alan was gathered with the other warriors who would join the kingdom's battle force. As usual, he was acting arrogant and belittling everyone else's skills, acting like he was leagues above them, especially since all the rank A adventurers and higher were out of the city. Only B rank and below were left. Hearing the hero's taunts, several adventurers were already seething with irritation. But for Alan, of course, this meant nothing. He even pushed it further, calling them nothing more than neat shields for the strongest to shine. Abusing his status as a hero, Alan made more and more enemies until the guild branch director arrived to restore order, reminding everyone that the real enemies were the monsters, and there was no time for infighting. Not wanting to lose the spotlight, Alan raised his voice and laid out his brilliant battle plan. First, every mage would unleash their most powerful spells, the kind that go boom. If each one could take out around 10 monsters, the infantry could move forward and buy more time. Then the mages would fire another round, and so on. At that, one of the mages raised her hand and admitted she couldn't cast anything that strong. Another said he could take down maybe one enemy at a time, tops. Alan exploded at these statements, claiming everyone there should be able to do far more. But even Maya confessed she wasn't feeling very confident. Her spells had gotten weaker, and she couldn't cast the same way anymore. That only made Alan angrier. He demanded to know why she hadn't mentioned something so important earlier, and she explained that she wasn't the only one. Lulu, Sheena, and Lena had all been weaker ever since Lloyd left the group. Alan felt betrayed, but Lena quickly pointed out that it was the leader's fault for never paying attention in the first place. He had become so sure of himself that he simply ignored the warnings they'd been trying to give for a long time. In fact, she added, because of that, she didn't think he was even qualified to call himself a hero. Fuming at her words, Alan swung a punch at her, but she blocked it with ease. Under the weight of everyone's judgmental stares, the hero completely lost it and stormed out of the guild. His teammates chased after him, all except Lena. The remaining adventurers quickly realized that this so-called hero wasn't anything like the rumors claimed, and morale dropped sharply. Noticing this, Lena decided to take responsibility. She assured the adventurers she would leave the hero's party, cut ties with him, and join the others on the front lines. On top of that, she suggested they bring in a certain mage named Lloyd. And speaking of the support mage, he had just discovered the source of the problem controlling the hordes. A massive magic stone, almost identical to the one from the farm. Kiriha noted that it was imbued with a dark power that interfered with her spells. There were probably several scattered around, so if they wanted to regain control of the situation, they'd have to deal with all of them. The Beastwoman could sense the magic stones if she got close enough, but in such a wide area, that was difficult. So, Lloyd combined telepathy with a search spell to extend her senses. On top of that, with a concealment spell, he could bring her close to the stones without the monsters noticing, though the spell would break if they took a heavy hit. So caution was key. With that plan, they approached the first magic stone and neutralized its power. Now, it was on to the next one. Meanwhile, the defenses of Ishtar close in, bracing themselves for the arrival of the enemy horde. One of the soldiers wonders aloud if this is really the right thing to do. And the guild branch director understands his concern after all. The lives of every single fighter here depend on one man. Hours earlier, back at the guild, Lena had explained that Lloyd, the white mage, was the true pillar of the hero's party, not the figures the public knew best. The truth was, everyone had been so blinded by the glorification of the hero that they'd completely overlooked the person who actually made things happen. The director asked if Lloyd was really the one responsible for the brilliant way the strongest adventurer group fought, and the warrior confirmed it without hesitation. What's more, she assured him that this war could only be won with the white mage's help. The problem was, she had no idea where he was, since the director kept track of all registered adventurers. He explained that Lloyd had gone on a mission with an S-rank group, and even the trip alone would take several days. Still, Lena believed he could arrive much sooner using some kind of travel magic, unless he was tied up with that mission at the moment. Either way, she hoped everyone would trust that the mage was doing exactly what needed to be done right now. Back in the present, the director explained that everyone had agreed to Lena's proposal, but doubt still lingered after all. They all wanted to protect their families, their friends, and everyone they loved. At last, the horde arrived for battle. Lena ordered the archers to loose their arrows. The volley struck down part of the front line of monsters, and then the shield bearers shouted for the advancing enemies to be pushed into the trench. While the mages hurled fireballs toward the oncoming swarm, waves of water followed, flooding the trenches to drown the creatures and widen the pit, making it even harder for the enemy to cross. The plan was simple. Hold out until the S-rank adventurers returned, only then would they stand a real chance. Speaking of which, Yui and her companions pressed on toward Ishtar, bolstered by Lloyd's support magic, which kept everyone from exhausting themselves along the way. The mere presence of the white mage was enough to inspire them to give their all. He had become the prime example of what it meant to do what was necessary. Even at night, they refused to rest. Every lost minute was a minute the city was being brutally attacked. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Kiriha finally reached the last magic stone, guarded by high-rank wolves and blood panthers. When the beast woman disabled the stone, the wild look vanished from the creature's eyes, but that only revealed another problem. Wolves and panthers were natural enemies, and now the two species were turning on each other. As the first two clashed, they knocked over the magic stone. In that instant, Kiriha lost her invisibility, and every beast in sight turned their snarling gaze toward her. To save his ally, Lloyd cast a spell to draw all their attention onto himself. At Ishtar's gates, some monsters managed to leap over the trench and reach the shield bearers, who raised their shields to block the assault and shove them back in. On the front line, with her guard up and leading the tanks, Lena was informed that the right flank had taken severe damage. As if that weren't enough, the defensive line broke, allowing the monsters to pour in. At that critical moment, the S-rank adventurers finally arrived. Elsewhere, Lloyd kept the enemies occupied with his physical enhancement spells, though that didn't mean he could take them all on at once. Kiriha knew he was only able to avoid the monsters with great skill, not defeat them outright. Even so, despite not being able to fight them head-on, this human was doing everything in his power to protect her. To honor his sacrifice, the beast woman began to sing. Her voice stirred a strange energy that wrapped around her body, catching the attention of every monster nearby. Reaching out to them, she slowly coaxed the beasts to back away. When Lloyd rushed over to ask what she had done, Kiriha explained that she had simply convinced them to return to the forest. Her spell didn't control them. It only allowed her to share her thoughts with them. Lloyd thanked her for saving him, and she returned the sentiment. In the end, they had each risked themselves for the other. With that settled, they needed to head for Ishtar at once. At the city gates, the S-rank adventurers joined the defensive forces, doing everything they could to hold back the thousands of monsters pressing in without mercy. Even with reinforcements, the sheer number of enemies soon began to overwhelm them. The front line started to collapse. The archers were running out of arrows, and the mages were nearly drained of mana. Still, Lena stood as the most inspiring figure on the field, the pillar holding the front line together, making everyone believe that if they could just endure, victory would come. But determination alone couldn't change reality. Warriors were falling in droves, the defenses were crumbling, and the threat was growing more terrifying by the minute. The branch director knew the army was at its limit. They couldn't hold out any longer. Just then, Kiriha appeared on the battlefield and began to sing her spell. The sweet, lilting voice of the young beast woman carried through the chaos, calming the savage eyes of the creatures that had been attacking so fiercely. And then, as if by some miracle, the monsters turned around and simply began to walk away slowly, peacefully, impossibly calm. Yui's group spotted Lloyd and erupted in relief. Seeing how drained Kiriha was from her singing, the white mage steadied her by the shoulders to make sure she was alright. He was awestruck by her ability, just as she was by his support magic. After all, she never could have cast her spell across such a vast battlefield without him. She asks what kind of help he provided, and Lloyd explains that he cast several layers of mana consumption reduction and magical power boost. Still, no matter how much he contributed, the mage knows it was the girl who did most of the work, and he makes sure to point that out. With that, the beast woman reveals that her real name is Claire, but before the moment can sink in, stone giants arrive at Ishtar's walls, making it clear that the war is far from over. A day later, Michelle looked over a map with delight, imagining that Ishtar must be under siege by 30,000 monsters at that very moment. But then, a messenger rushed into his mansion to report that the advancing horde had suddenly begun to scatter. Deep in the forest, Claire lamented that the golems couldn't hear her, while Lloyd suspected some kind of demonic interference. To reach the front lines before the monsters, the support mage cast a spell that boosted their speed, dodging through the enemy ranks and nearly being crushed in the process. The two finally made it safely to the moat that guarded the city gates. Without hesitation, Lloyd wrapped his arm around his companion's waist and leapt across the gap, a feat that left every soldier watching in awe. From that moment on, their spirits lifted, reassured by the presence of the young mage who had already proven himself far above the ordinary. One by one, his fellow S-rank companions arrived as well, celebrating the fact that the monsters had retreated. Lloyd gave the credit to Claire, but when Yui and Silica heard the name, they were confused because they could have sworn the girl's name was Kiriha. Still, there was no time to dwell on it. The golems had yet to arrive, and the main support mage at the trench was already utterly drained after such a fierce fight. Even so, despite his exhaustion, Lloyd knew he had to stay on his feet and keep fighting. The future of Ishtar depended on it. Just then, the guild branch director appeared to lend a hand, and Lloyd asked him to protect Claire during the battle. The man immediately ordered a squad of knights to guard the beast girl. Before she left, Lloyd thanked her, admitting that without her help, the outcome would have been far worse. She shook her head, saying it was the other way around, that they had saved her. The guild director declared that Lloyd was the city's only hope, a statement that made the boy uneasy. Lena explained Alan had refused to join the war. After quarreling with a few adventurers at the guild, he simply abandoned his duty. Lloyd pointed out that thousands of lives were at stake, but Lena scoffed, saying that man was no hero. At that, Lena faltered, clutching the deep wound in her abdomen. Lloyd, though nearly drained of magic, managed to heal her completely. The effort left him so weak he nearly collapsed, and she had to hold him up. She told him that thanks to his support magic, Their party had always been the strongest, even if Lloyd himself couldn't see how powerful he truly was. She admitted that she had never realized just how vital he'd been to their group. She hadn't even stopped the others from casting him out. With tears in her eyes, she apologized. But Lloyd still believed he'd been expelled because he was too weak. Before they could speak further, the golems finally reached the moat. The soldiers at the front charged in recklessly, and Lloyd tried to warn them that these weren't ordinary golems. It was too late. Several warriors leapt into battle only to be slaughtered instantly. Seeing this, Lena raised her shield and ordered volleys of fireballs. But just like the arrows before them, the blasts barely scratched the monster's stone armor. One after another, the golems pushed across the moat, forcing the defenders back step by step. Even on the verge of collapse, Lloyd prepared to buff the troops. His allies pointed out there were dozens of soldiers, but he assured them he could handle it not all at once, but in rotating groups. Quickly, he laid physical enchantments on the frontline fighters while boosting the magical units with greater firepower. His own party members also received enhancements, though everyone knew the effects wouldn't last long. Meanwhile, Yui scrambled up a wooden platform to rally the soldiers. She shouted that Lloyd had strengthened several warriors who could now meet the golems head-on. The troops still doubted they could stand against such giants until Lena proved it herself. Bracing her shield, she stopped a giant's fist dead in its tracks. To drive the point home, Yui vaulted onto a golem and split it clean in half with a single sword strike. Lena reminded everyone that this was only possible because of Lloyd's magic. Slowly, the soldiers began to realize their bodies felt lighter, and even the weapons and armor that once weighed them down seemed easier to carry. In the midst of the chaos, Lloyd gave orders. Cross was to back up the magic units, while Daggers was tasked with protecting Silica so she could bombard the front lines safely. As for Lloyd himself, he could barely stay standing, so the guild director carried him to a safer spot from which he could continue supporting. From then on, the archers worked hand in hand with the mages, unleashing blazing arrows that proved effective against the golems, cutting down several under Cross's lead. At the front, Daggers planted his massive shield before Silica, giving her the protection she needed to rain devastating spells on the enemy. After a long stretch of brutal fighting, the defenders finally whittled the enemy down to a single golem. To end the war once and for all, a soldier charged in and struck with his sword, but the blade shattered on impact, and the man was crushed by a single punch. That could mean only one thing. Lloyd's enhancements had just worn off. With their strength fading, panic swept through the troops, and they began fleeing in terror. The last golem pressed forward, reaching the gates. Yui planted herself in its path, but Lena shoved her aside to save her life. Daggers stepped up next, shield raised to block the strike, yet the sheer weight of the blow sent the tank crashing to the ground. In a final move, faced with his lack of power, Lloyd manages to enchant Yui's weapon. Realizing this, the girl calls upon the support of the squires Daggers and Lena. With the sword in hand, the young swordswoman waits for the golem to throw another punch, and when the blow is absorbed by the shields, she takes advantage of the enemy's lowered guard to deliver the strike that would end the battle. Watching the fight from afar, the mysterious mage mutters to himself that Lloyd seems to be thriving far more in a real battlefield than he ever did with his group of adventurers. Meanwhile, the great General Grist storms into Michelle's mansion in a fury, determined to announce that their enemies have rescued the beast woman. But Michelle is not there, which drives the demon into such a rage that he smashes his host's table clean in half. With his plans crumbling, Grist begins to suspect Michelle's interference, and so he decides to turn against his former ally. Sometime later, Lloyd awakens in the inn's bed. Yui sitting by his side, tending to her friend. The mage laments not being strong enough to endure the entire fight, but she reminds him that he is far greater and far more cherished than he believes. Outside his room, dozens of townsfolk press against the door, hoping for just a glimpse of the battle's hero. All the attention unsettles Lloyd so much that he slams the door shut in their faces. If his self-esteem is low, his shyness is sky high, and it would never allow him to handle so many people swarming over him. Yui opens the door and tells him to step out with his head held high. He does leave, though through the window, with his head down, hoping the fall wouldn't kill him. Far away, the mage who had been following Lloyd's steps arrives at a small cottage. The moment he tries to open the door, an explosion greets him. Lloyd's former master had cast a spell the instant she sensed something suspicious nearby. She demands to know how he survived the blast, but like any true magician, he never reveals his secrets. Inside, he comes face to face with old acquaintances. Lily and Thor. Lily greets him as the Phantom Alchemist, since he abandoned potion making to focus entirely on gathering information. Lloyd's master admits she hasn't seen him in years, and so she asks about her old apprentice. The alchemist explains that the boy was cast out of the hero's party, but reassures her there's nothing to worry about. Lloyd has now joined an S-rank group. More than that, he has very important news about this young support mage. Back at the inn, after fleeing the crowd, Lloyd is cornered by his teammates, who demand to know why he's running from everyone. They explain that nobody's chasing him to invite him to dinner, it's just the townspeople's way of showing gratitude, since he saved the city. True to his insecure nature, Lloyd insists he only gave a little assistance in the war. His friend, however, make it crystal clear, he needs to stop setting such impossible standards for himself, because it's only tormenting him. Instead, he should learn to have far more confidence in who he is. In the cottage, the Phantom Alchemist confides that Lloyd has no idea how truly capable he is, a blind spot that could harm not only his own well-being, but also his relationships with everyone around him. Saddened, Lloyd's master admits she would hate to think her student might repeat the same mistakes she once made. In Ishtar's central square, Yui persuades Lloyd to appear before the people. Immediately, the crowd raises their mugs and fists high, cheering for the savior of the city. Lloyd, in turn, insists they should thank the warriors who fought so bravely for the territory's safety. Yet those very soldiers step forward, declaring they could never have fought without the unwavering support of the great mage. With no room left to argue, Lloyd is crowned, at least in the people's hearts, the great hero of Ishtar. Not long after, Alan hears the news. The teammate he once cast aside has become a celebrity, hailed for carrying the city's army on his back during battle. As expected, he is anything but pleased, especially since his own title of hero is about to be stripped away after refusing to lend aid in the fight. With no patience for the situation, the party leader orders his subordinates to pack their things. They're leaving the city at once. After all, this place now sees Lloyd as the savior of the land, and Alan can't stand to stay another day. Back in the forest cottage, the Phantom Alchemist explains that Lloyd's new party is filled with elite adventurers, including a 17-year-old swordswoman, a true prodigy. As the conversation unfolds, a cup of drink is poured for each member at the table. They all take a sip, and the alchemist raises his glass, honored to drink alongside such a legendary group. Lily cuts him off, urging him to stop with the pleasantries. He already knows why they're here. According to Thor, today is the day they honor Sybil. On that note, the alchemist reveals that the demon race has been controlling monsters to conquer Ishtar. They've been exploiting orc magic, and the troubling question is, why are the demons acting now? Of all times, it almost seems as if the Demon King has returned. At this, Lloyd's master snaps, declaring that monster was exterminated long ago. There's no chance of his return. Otherwise, everything Sybil achieved would be for nothing. Thor calms her, pointing out that the possibility is slim, and anxiety won't change anything. To protect the future Sybil created, they must give everything they have right now. Back in the city, the S-rank adventurers are summoned by the young Lord of Ishtar. Upon entering his mansion, they are surprised to find Claire waiting inside. Only then do they learn that the Beast Woman has been welcomed as a guest of honor by the Lord of this land. At last, the young man introduces himself properly, Lord Abel Lucas. Cross admitted that at first, he thought the guy was either the gardener or the butler of the house. Not even the rest of the team believed this boy was actually the one in charge of everything, especially since they'd heard the Lord had been in that position for over 10 years. Naturally, everyone assumed he'd be at least a little older. Puzzled, Abel Lucas asked if he didn't look older, and Silica replied that he didn't even seem older than they were. According to the Lord, keeping up appearances takes effort. Yui muttered that this seemed like far more than just effort. When Lloyd remembered that his master also looked unusually young, he and Yui began to suspect it might be some kind of beautification magic. Abel laughed and promised to share a few tricks on preserving youth, but only after they discussed what really mattered. Meanwhile, on the staircase of a castle in another kingdom, a beastman despaired over finding no clue about Claire's whereabouts. Despite searching for so long, suddenly, a guard rushed in, calling out to Syrian. The young lady Claire had finally been found. At that very moment, Lloyd and his companions were stunned to discover that Claire was none other than the second princess of the Fora's Empire, a peaceful nation where the orcs lived. Abel Lucas then asked what they thought of the Beastwoman's magic. Lloyd admitted it was impressive, but also terrifying, given that it could be used to control monsters. Abel agreed that her power was truly one of a kind. That was exactly why they could never allow the demons to capture her, and why the Empire had been searching for her all along. In the end, it was these adventurers who had saved the princess. Speaking of which, Abel Lucas revealed a mission worthy of heroes like them. The Empire would certainly try to reclaim Claire, but the Lord of Ishtar wanted the group to escort her safely to Sylph's the capital of the Kingdom of Furin. The party hesitated, pointing out that escorting someone of such importance seemed more like a task for royal knights than for simple adventurers. But Lord Abel explained that sending knights would draw far too much attention. He feared the demons would immediately realize that such a critical piece was being moved across the board. For that reason, Claire herself insisted on entrusting her safety to the adventurers before her. Once the meeting was over, everyone gathered outside to prepare for departure. Claire asked them to call her simply by her name, even if the adventurers felt uneasy about addressing a princess so informally. Yui, however, slipped off her glove and offered the beastwoman a friendly handshake, giving the others the confidence they needed to relax in her presence. With that, Lloyd declared it was time to head for the royal capital. 10 days later, since they had chosen the safer but longer route, the group was still quite a distance from their destination. That's when Lloyd suggested they stop in the next town to rest a little before resuming the journey. Yui, by the way, mentioned to Claire that the hot springs there were wonderful, to which the beast woman admitted she'd never had the chance to enjoy one. Cross remarked to the others that Yui seemed a bit too relaxed about the whole thing, but Daggers argued she was probably just being considerate toward the princess, making sure Claire didn't feel left out among the group. Besides, as Silica pointed out, Claire had grown up in a royal family and never had the chance to experience the outside world. Yui might actually be the perfect person to introduce her to new things. Convinced by the reasoning, the archer reconsidered and admitted that the swordswoman was acting like a true leader by thinking outside the box. However, the moment they reached the hot springs, Yui dashed ahead, leaving everyone else behind just so she could soak first, making Cross certain she really was just being laid back after all. Speaking of relaxing, the girls wasted no time enjoying the hot water while they could. Well, all except Claire. Having never done anything like this, the princess was embarrassed about showing her body, something the other girls had no problem with. Eventually, once they managed to coax her into joining the aquatic gathering, the adventurers complimented her beauty, which quickly spiraled into a debate about who had the most developed body. In the end, it turned into Silica accusing Yui of eating too many snacks lately, claiming that's why the swordswoman's figure had gotten a bit rounder. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wooden partition, the men had their own kind of playful contest. While the girls compared who had the bigger melons, the guys competed to see who could scrub the back of the friend in front of them with more force. Being at the end of the line, Lloyd drifted off into thoughts about his mission. In his mind, the closer they got to the capital, the greater the chance of running into demons. If the enemy truly intended to recapture Claire, now would be a reasonable time to strike. What made him doubt that, however, was the sheer scale such an operation would require to breach this part of the kingdom. It was more likely they'd send only a handful of elite units to move in the shadows. Whatever the enemy's next step might be, the only thing the White Mage knew was that he had to stay one step ahead to prevent Claire from being kidnapped and to rub it in the demons' faces that the only horn they should fear was the one only his girlfriend could provide. And speaking of rubbing, Lloyd was so lost in thought that he ended up scrubbing Cross's back with excessive force. Around the men's section of the hot springs, shouts like, "Not so hard, Lloyd," echoed through the air. After this little bonding session, the group gathered to discuss preparations for the rest of the trip. Lloyd suggested staying in town a few more days to settle some loose ends before heading to the capital, which Daggers thought was perfect, especially since he needed to buy new gear, considering his current shield looked more like a grandma's pot lid. Silica also loved the idea, since she hadn't had time to properly practice her magic, or even, as she joked, to fart in peace during this long adventure. Seeing how concerned his friends were with staying sharp, Lloyd thought he should also give his best to develop his own skills. After all, he was under orders to protect Claire, and as the White Mage, he needed to rise to the responsibility and never let his companions down again, like he felt he had in the last battle. The next day, Daggers kept his word and went searching for a decent shop to buy new equipment. By chance, he came across Yui and Claire taking a boat ride through the city's beautiful waterways. When Yui asked about his weapon hunting progress, the tank sighed that he hadn't found anything worthwhile yet. Hearing this, the princess recommended he check out a small, shabby-looking shop she'd noticed on her walk. It didn't look like much, she said, but you never know. With nothing to lose, the shield bearer gave it a try and was astonished by the sheer quality of the items inside. Out of nowhere, an old man appeared, practically scolding him for even being there, as if Daggers were some kind of thug looking for trouble. After reassuring the elder that he only wanted to browse the merchandise, Daggers examined the equipment on display. Yet, as impressed as he was, he couldn't understand why the shop wasn't thriving despite having such fine wares. The answer came soon enough. A rowdy group of adventurers barged in with swagger. Their leader found it amusing that there was another customer inside and even mocked Daggers. assuming he must be a low-level adventurer if he was considering buying weapons as pathetic as the ones here. Enraged, the shopkeeper stormed out, blood in his eyes, to kick the thugs out, but the leader stood his ground and sneered, asking how business was going. The old man laughed bitterly, pointing out that this very man was the biggest reason the shop wasn't doing well. Curious, Daggers asked if these guys were land grabbers, but they denied it with pride. Instead, as the henchmen introduced him as though they were presenting a god, their leader revealed himself to be none other than Garen, the strongest, most handsome, and most muscular rank adventurer in the region. Unimpressed, Daggers simply assumed the guy must be famous. Garen confirmed it with arrogance, adding that Daggers, on the other hand, looked like just another rat from the gutter. Unfazed, the tank asked why an rank adventurer was harassing an old man. Garen explained with a grin. The stubborn geezer refused to sell him one of the legendary relics of Rion's. The shopkeeper replies that he'll only hand over that piece of equipment to someone who truly deserves it. That answer makes the cocky intruder furious, so furious, in fact, that he looks ready to beat the old man up. Daggers, who had been calm as a cricket until now, suddenly flares up at such a pitiful threat coming from someone who dares call himself an adventurer. The man's mere gesture of revolt already has Garen's henchmen riled up. So much so that the big bald guy jumps in to protect his boss, without even acknowledging his opponent. Daggers twists the man's wrist exactly the way your father would twist yours when you insisted on play fighting as a kid. Then, out of nowhere, the tank pulls out his shield through the storage technique, and since the enemies have no idea what kind of sorcery that is, they're left thinking it's some kind of high-level witchcraft. With no time to react, the entire group is sent flying out of the store by a single, well-placed shield bash. Flat on the ground like a sack of potatoes. Garen swore this guy was just some weak adventurer. That's when Daggers flashes his S-rank tag, flexing on the jealous party absolutely based. The shopkeeper asks why the tank hid that from the start, and Daggers shrugs, saying that flaunting rank is for betas. Overwhelmed by the sheer testosterone radiating from the tank's triceps, the rival group tucks tail and disappears without a trace. After the chaos, and after witnessing such honor and strength from his customer, the old man decides to give Daggers a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Meanwhile, someone who calls himself an adventurer is trying not to fall behind, working on his own skills during their temporary stay in the city. Besides polishing his basic support spells, the white mage is eager to learn new offensive magic. Just like Silica, he wants to contribute at the front line, too. The only problem is this. If we were to compare fire magic, let's say the boy is a cheap gas station lighter, while the girl is a full-on fuel explosion. Yui agrees the girl is incredible. But what makes her extraordinary isn't talent or an absurd pool of mana. Speaking of her, Silica is alone in the forest, by a lake, thinking how badly the last war would have gone without the crucial buffs of that so-called adventurer. Drumming that thought into her mind, the young and gifted sorceress promises herself she'll grow stronger, soon enough. While compressing a fireball inside magic circles, the sphere detonates too early and nearly barbecues her. But even that isn't enough to make her quit. After all, no one masters a high-level fire spell overnight. If repeated failure is guaranteed, then so is the need to try again. And that's exactly what Yui admires most about her friend, her determination. Silica is a true prodigy, one people have called the God's Envoy since she was a child. Back when Yui first met her still as a little girl, Silica was in an open field, trying to hit a government signpost with fire. Her aim, though, was about as good as a 5-year-old boy trying to hit the toilet bowl right after waking up. Youth has its limits, after all. Even so, Silica was like Sasuke and Rock Lee rolled into one, or Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo together. Talent fused with relentless effort. With that mindset, she never lets herself be easily discouraged, and it's exactly this drive that allows her, in that very moment, to create her newest spell, Burst. The result? Half the forest blown to bits, the price of progress. After pulling off such a feat, Silica is left drenched. She wonders why she has to be so clumsy because even if she tries to act careful in front of her teammates, the truth is she's a total scatterbrain when she's alone, and it bothers her more than she cares to admit. Shoving those thoughts aside, the mage prepares to leave, when suddenly a sound comes from the woods. Fearing it might be a monster, she braces herself. But it's only Daggers, who now has to explain why he suddenly showed up out of nowhere. Earlier, the shopkeeper had explained he would grant Daggers a shield forged by an extraordinary blacksmith named Rion's. Its name is Aegis, crafted from the world's toughest materials, able to withstand any kind of attack. In short, Aegis is a legendary, indestructible shield so heavy that few could ever wield it. But the old man believes Daggers is the right one for it. Unlike those 4 insufferable adventurers who didn't deserve to even touch something so valuable. Still, the merchant would only hand Aegis over if Daggers helped with one thing. People in the city had been whispering all morning about explosions near the forest lake. suspecting either the appearance of a dangerous monster or demons conducting bizarre experiments. If the shield bearer could solve the mystery, the shield would be his. Upon hearing the story, Silica feels offended at being mistaken for a demon. Daggers, on the other hand, thinks the comparison makes sense. She did, after all, obliterate an entire lake along with its fauna and flora. After resolving the mystery, Daggers reports back to the shopkeeper, with his companion at his side. Luckily, the sorceress managed to restore the lake's waters with her magic, the only downside being that the town won't be eating fish for the next few months. Daggers apologizes for his partner's blunder, but the old man insists the boy has nothing to apologize for. On the contrary, as promised, the merchant hands over the shield. Daggers protests that he didn't actually complete the task, but the old man values his honesty and strength enough to deem him worthy of wielding the mighty Aegis. Without wasting a second, the shield bearer runs off like a 7-year-old at recess, eager to show his friends his brand new toy. The group was delighted with their companion's new skill, and Yui couldn't help but feel proud that Silica had mastered such an important spell. Brimming with excitement, she asked to see it performed live, and the mage agreed. So long as the swordswoman understood she might get accidentally pulverized during the show. Watching how incredible his friends were, and how far they had come, Lloyd refused to be left in the dust. He swore he'd rise to the challenge. While Cross complained about the pressure everyone was piling onto this journey. In response, Yui urged her companions not to be afraid. Patient, she said, was the virtue of those who endure, and if every step was taken with equal parts caution and determination, then the future would not only be bright, it would be inevitable. Her words left everyone speechless, until she reminded them of the most important lesson of all. An empty sack can't stand upright. On that note, she invited Claire to check out a restaurant that looked promising, to which Cross, unimpressed, muttered that their so-called leader was just being lazy again. By the way, a few days later, the archer starts to feel even more pressure to improve, especially since Daggers and Silica are making great progress, and he simply can't afford to fall behind. Sure, he's upgraded his gear, but he can't find a decent place to train in this city. Suddenly, a boy in a rush gets distracted and trips right into Cross. The S rank shows concern, helping the kid up and noticing his adventurer's tag. Once the boy confirms that Cross is also an adventurer, he shocks him by inviting the adult to form a party together. Regardless of the answer, the kid drags the S rank to the guild, which, to Cross's surprise, is much smaller than the one in Ishtar though lively. The boy, clearly nervous, apologizes for bothering him, but Cross thinks to himself there was no way he could have refused after the kid pulled that abandoned puppy face. He soon learns the boy's name is Lin, and asks if he really shouldn't already be in a party since adventuring solo isn't exactly recommended. Lin lowers his head at the question. While a few other adventurers mock him for teaming up with the so-called Eternal Rank E, they assume Cross must be some clueless rookie and that sticking with the kid will only bring him trouble. Listening in, Cross begins to understand Lin's reputation in that guild. For his part, Lin admits he's a failure and a burden to anyone who groups up with him, but the experienced archer tries to reassure him, saying their ranks are actually pretty similar. That little lie lifts Lin's spirits just enough to make him feel like he isn't a complete nobody. With that, the two set out to take on a quest. Meanwhile, a short pink-haired girl is also causing trouble in town, with a tourist guidebook in hand. Yui is desperate to find a famous candy shop that caught her eye, just one of the many places she plans to visit while she's staying there. But after drooling over the thought of sweets, she presses her stomach and notices a little bit of chub she hadn't seen before. Still, she promises herself she'll burn off those extra pounds in battle. All she needs to do is push a little harder, and that muffin top will be gone in no time. Out of nowhere, she spots a wealthy lady in the plaza accusing a poor, defenseless boy of dirtying her dress. The child can barely speak from sheer terror, but the woman doesn't care. She orders her servant to make the boy pay with his life. Some bystanders think someone should step in, but everyone knows she's from the Windy clan, a noble family no one in their right mind would want to cross. But Yui couldn't care less. She jumps in to stop the man from striking the boy. Furious, the noblewoman demands to know how this girl dares stand in her way, throwing out the classic, "Do you know who you're talking to?" With a smirk, Yui admits she doesn't know exactly, but she's pretty sure it's just some lady way too old to be picking fights with kids on the street. That sets the noble off completely, and she orders her guards to teach the pink-haired brat a lesson. Yui, however, tells the boy to run for it, then blocks all 3 incoming sword strikes with a single parry. Back with the dynamic archer duo, they finally locate the nest of red slimes they were tasked to wipe out. Wasting no time, Cross pulls his bow from storage and knocks an arrow, but then has to explain to Lin what the hell he just did, reminding him that in this world adventurers don't usually summon weapons out of thin air. Quickly brushing the subject aside, he fires the first arrow into a slime's core, then drops a second creature right after. He urges Lin not to just stand there and to join in. Lin draws his bowstring and releases a shot, but the force is pitiful and his aim even worse. A complete disaster. Nearly in tears, the boy apologizes profusely. While Cross realizes this partnership is going to be anything but easy. Back in town, Yui remains calm, fully confident she has the situation under control. She even taunts her opponents, pointing out that everyone already knows who's going to win, so they might as well give up. Still, the noblewoman isn't about to walk away. Her fury only grows with every second her men fail to lay a hand on the short girl. Unbeknownst to her, though, some of the onlookers have already recognized Yui as the adventurer who reached S rank at such a young age. Even so, Wendy has a card up her sleeve. With a subtle signal to someone in the crowd, a hidden mage steps forward, raises a staff, and conjures a magic circle beneath Yui's feet. Chains erupt, binding her body tightly. According to the noblewoman, these chains gradually drain both stamina and mana from their victim. And sure enough, even as an S rank, Yui can't break free. Wendy watches with a smile, fully expecting the girl to wither away before her eyes. But just as her guards move in again, another woman appears, this one cloaked and hooded. She doesn't claim the right to decide who should or shouldn't fight, but she does point out that 4 against 1 is nothing short of cowardice. Wendy snaps at her to move aside, insisting that this is the best part of the show, when her enemies finally learn how foolish it is to challenge her. In that instant, the hooded figure moves with blinding speed. In the span of a single second, she knocks down all 3 guards, disables the mage, and shatters Yui's chains. As a skilled adventurer herself, Yui's eyes manage to follow the woman's movements a little more clearly, but even so, she can hardly believe what she just witnessed. In the same way, Wendy couldn't believe her escort had been defeated so easily. Since that was the case, the hooded woman stepped forward to slap her just the same, forcing the noble to break down completely, dropping to her knees on the filthy ground of the plaza. With the matter settled, Yui thanked the stranger for saving her. The woman, showing humility, admitted she only got involved because she was looking for something. Yui couldn't help but ask how she could become as strong as her. But the hooded one simply told her not to rush, she was still young, and already strong enough. At that, Yui confessed that in her party there was an incredible white mage named Lloyd, and she often felt far too dependent on him. That was why she needed to get stronger. The moment the woman recognized that name, she removed her hood and invited Yui to train with her. And speaking of Lloyd, the mage was practically frying his brain, trying to keep up with all the spells he'd promised to improve during his stay in the city. His companions, worried about him, went to check in, but he reassured them he was fine. To them, it seemed obvious he was pushing himself too hard. And even if that was true, Lloyd still regretted that the results weren't as good as he'd hoped. Seeing this, Daggers suggested he take a break, get out of the house, and clear his head, since he'd been shut inside for days. But Lloyd insisted he had no time for such things, brushing off the idea. That was, until Claire herself asked him out for a walk. This time, the sly bastard accepted. And since we're on the topic of invitations, the hooded woman pointed out that Yui really shouldn't be so quick to accept one from a complete stranger. Deep in the forest, the swordswoman brushed it off, saying she trusted her instincts to judge people's character. Then she asked for the woman's name. With a faint smile, she told Yui to call her Lilith. The way she said it made Yui suspect it was a fake name. Even so, she felt she could trust this mysterious woman. Either way, Lilith declared it was time to begin training. She summoned her sword with a storage spell, the kind of magic Yui hadn't even known existed until meeting Lloyd. It made her realize just how small her world had been until recently. One way or another, she swore she'd learn to become as strong as this strange woman. Elsewhere, Claire and Lloyd were sharing a pastry from a shop Yui had recommended. Lloyd thanked her for the company, though Claire insisted she was only repaying him for everything he'd done for her these past few days. She brought up his magic research, saying it must be exhausting. Lloyd admitted it was always difficult to find answers in that field. That was when Claire confessed she wished she could help. Hearing this, Lloyd asked if the Beast Woman's magic, the song that connected emotions with monsters, was an ancestral spell. The question left her thoughtful. Back at the guild, the most determined archers were training. Cross was giving Lin some tips, pointing out the boy's excessive tension and how hard it was for him to fully draw the bowstring. According to the veteran, a rank E adventurer needed to study his target and anticipate its movements. After the advice, Lin managed to graze a slime for the very first time. Progress. At last, instead of shooting at the entire body, his new mission was to strike the monster's core. Before the boy could fire again, Cross told him to raise his chin, stay calm, and steady his body. Lin followed every word. This time, he hit the slime's core, and the joy on his face was impossible to miss. Cross had thought the boy was clumsy, but it turned out he was a quick learner. Meanwhile, Lilith instructed Yui to try cutting down a tree in front of them without moving from where she stood. Yui frowned, wondering if it was some kind of riddle, but then her companion swung her sword through the air, sending a magical strike that reached the tree and split it in half. According to the warrior, she had channeled magic through her blade. If she could learn that, Yui realized she'd finally have a way to handle long-range attacks, and that possibility excited her. During this time, Claire revealed to Lloyd that she really was the heir of ancestral magic, just as he had suspected. These ancient spells were secret techniques recorded only in old texts, and in his opinion, her power to command monsters was extraordinary. Thinking it over, he asked if he might be able to wield such magic himself. If so, it could give him a clue for advancing his research. Claire, however, feared it was impossible. Ancestral magic, she explained, was a gift granted once in a century, at random, to someone born with the ability. Anyone else who tried to use it would suffer divine punishment. In fact, she said, there was one tale of a person who had once done so, someone who wasn't an heir, and that person died the moment they attempted it. With that in mind, Claire understood Lloyd's desire, but dreaded the consequences of him meddling with such a taboo. Hearing her concern, Lloyd promised he wouldn't bring up the subject again. Back on the training grounds, Lin's aim had grown far more consistent. Together with Cross, he managed to take down all the slimes and complete the mission. Cross joked that now the boy just needed to learn how to fire arrows in rapid succession. Lin's jaw nearly dropped at the thought, until Cross chuckled and said he was only kidding. There was no way to pull off something like that. Either way, it was time to collect the materials and head back. But just as they were about to, the two were startled by the appearance of a Luna Magra, a higher-level monster that just happened to be standing guard right over the slime cores they needed to prove their mission complete. Because of that, Cross fires an arrow straight into the creature's eye, but even that part of its body, which should have been sensitive, felt as hard as stone. He points out that to bring down an enemy of this level, he's going to need a powerful chain of attacks. Lin remembers the combo shot Cross had just mentioned, but the man laughs it off, repeating that he was only joking. That trick doesn't even exist. But the boy suddenly has an idea, and when Cross hears it, the seasoned adventurer realizes it just might work. Cross then begins summoning his arrows directly from his storage magic instead of pulling them one by one from his quiver. With that rapid fire sequence, he's able to put enough pressure on the spider's eye to burst the organ, splitting open the monster's skull and piercing its brain. With the mission a complete success, riding high on morale, Lin and Cross return to the guild not only with the slime's magic cores, but also with the carcass of the Luna Magra they had defeated in the forest. Seeing what the pair had accomplished, the adventurers around them gape in shock before breaking into cheers for their comrade's achievement. Cross hopes the others will start giving Lin the respect he deserves after this. Speaking of which, the boy sheepishly asks if it's okay for him to take the credit, since Cross did most of the work. But Cross is just grateful he learned something new from the kid, something he'd never even thought possible before, so he couldn't care less about credit. Still, Lin apologizes for all the trouble he caused. Cross tells him to go easy on himself, since he's always apologizing for everything. Grateful for the support his comrade gave him, Lin asks if Cross is actually way stronger than he claims, because this mission made it pretty obvious. At that, Cross sighs, sorry for deceiving the boy, and reveals his S-rank tag, which only makes the poor kid panic even more, begging forgiveness for making someone so important take the time to teach him how to use a bow. Meanwhile, Yui had been practicing non-stop, but no matter how hard she tried, she kept failing. Frustration set in, especially when Lilith admitted that it should have been easy once the swordswoman got used to the exercise. Overly tense, Yui forces herself to focus on the steps of the technique. The key is syncing the magic with her sword style and preventing it from going out of control on release. But the truth is, this thing is absurdly difficult and Yui can't help but roll her eyes at Lilith's arrogance for calling it no big deal. Either way, she didn't come this far to quit, so she adjusts her stance and tries again. Impressed by her determination, Lilith asks why Yui wants so badly to become stronger. Yui confesses that when she first became his rank, she thought she was above everyone else, but after meeting Lloyd, she realized there's always someone stronger. Now, she wants to grow enough to proudly say she can fight side by side with the white mage. Suddenly, a massive feline that had been lurking in the shadows pounces on Lilith. In a panic, Yui reacts and unleashes the very magic she'd been struggling with all this time, cleaving the beast clean in two, as if she hadn't just been attacked by a giant predator. Lilith merely praises Yui for finally pulling it off. Yui assumes this woman always knew she couldn't be hurt because she's so powerful. But Lilith dismisses that, insisting it was Yui who saved her. The words bring a smile to Yui's face, though she quickly loses it as exhaustion takes over, and she collapses into sleep. Catching the girl before she falls, Lilith feels a quiet joy that Lloyd has such reliable companions. That night, the rest of the party grows worried over Yui's long absence until they hear a noise at the door. Opening it, they find her fast asleep on the doorstep like a child. While Lilith is already gone, her hood pulled over her head. The next morning, it's time for the team to finally set out on their main objective after days of waiting. Lloyd laments that he seems to be the only one who hasn't made any progress. Well, other than optimizing his spells, learning new group combat magic, and even creating a brand new tracking skill. The others exchange glances, muttering about how this idiot always acts like nothing he does is ever enough, while the white mage practically cries over his supposed lack of growth. Meanwhile, Lily returns to Lloyd's master, grumbling about having had to use a fake name just to check up on her disciple. Merlin, however, snaps furious that Lily's the only one having fun with all this nonsense, and so she decides to go see the boy herself. Sometime later, Merlin finally reached the capital, and she was dazzled by its beauty, its brilliance, and the constant motion of the city. Far away, in a dark and brooding castle, Grist was reporting to his master, who revealed himself through a flickering blue flame. The master's voice carried disappointment. His subordinate had failed to crush even a small countryside town. That failure gnawed at the demon as well, for the expectations placed upon him were enormous. The flame demanded to know what had become of the beast woman, but Grist had no idea where she had gone. That answer only deepened the master's discontent. After all, the great general of the Demon King's army had once promised that he would command an unstoppable force of monsters, a decisive trump card for the continent's invasion. Grist admitted he had fallen short. The master, cold and direct, demanded results or the general would lose his position. As the meeting ended, the demon wandered through the city's shadowy streets, simmering with frustration. The weight of his responsibility pressed down harder than ever, especially since he had no clue where to begin searching for Claire. That was when Michelle appeared, offering a hand. Grist snapped back, reminding the human of his audacity for showing up after his betrayal. Michelle calmly explained he had acted that way only because his payment had never arrived. Regardless, he knew something important. Claire was headed toward the royal capital, but not under the watch of common soldiers. She was being guarded by S-rank adventurers. Suspicious, Grist demanded to know how Michelle had such knowledge. The man confessed he was desperate to clear his name after the backlash from his last deed. Helping the general reclaim the beast woman was his chance at redemption. Grist despised the man's slippery nature, but with no leads of his own, he grudgingly accepted the help. Meanwhile, the beast woman herself was traveling with her companions. Their teamwork was growing stronger by the day, not just in tactics and combat, but in the ease of living side by side. Bonds were deepening, the atmosphere becoming lighter, yet never so light that they would lower their guard. Even the faint rustle of a rabbit in the bushes was enough to set the adventurers on edge, weapons ready. Since they had already paused, Lloyd took the chance to use his detection magic. He reassured the group no demons nearby. They decided to rest for a moment. The white mage, however, pointed out something curious. When the rabbit had startled them, every single one of them had sensed something at the exact same time. Falling into formation had built their confidence even further. Yui then asked Lloyd what he had felt in that instant. He admitted he had done what he could, but still felt far too unsure of himself. Yui smiled, gently teasing him about his bad habit of selling himself short. In her eyes, he needed to trust himself more. Claire chimed in as well, saying the boy had more talent than anyone she knew. She had even trained in that city with the goal of reaching his level. Cross added his agreement, admitting it had shown him how much further he still had to grow. Daggers noted that ever since Lloyd had joined, they had all realized how much they would come to rely on their white mage if they stood still. Yui concluded that true confidence meant understanding your own real strength, and you could never reach your full potential while underestimating yourself. Lloyd, taking their words to heart, promised to try to be more confident from now on. At that very moment, Merlin was standing before the gates of the royal castle, only to be stopped by two guards. With a casual gesture, she cast a spell that bent their minds, and the soldiers obediently stepped aside. She strolled through the palace corridors, searching for a particular chamber. Eventually, she came upon the library, where her sharp eyes caught something unusual. The room itself was an illusion, an elaborate forgery. Facing one of the walls, she released a spell that unveiled the truth. A hidden door, the very one she had been seeking all along. Before she could knock, a young beast woman named Ryon appeared from within, recognized her instantly, and pulled her inside. They had not seen each other since the war against the Demon King. Inside that secret chamber, Ryon explained she had sensed the powerful scent of Merlin's magic from afar. Their reunion soon turned to weightier matters, the politics of the continent. Ryon revealed that the one now ruling the Sorcerer Kingdom was none other than the Demon King's son. Yet the kingdom had remained quiet since the Great War, for the power of the previous king had been immense. Merlin was surprised to find her friend keeping a secret laboratory inside the royal castle itself. That could only mean the king's trust in her was extraordinary. Ryan explained that research into magic granted her certain privileges. Merlin, almost wistful, lamented that she herself had no spells worth researching. But Ryan quickly reminded her Merlin could cast without incantations and had even invented the technique of storage magic without a staff. After analyzing the foundations of ancient magic and applying them in new ways, Merlin only chuckled, saying necessity is the mother of invention. Still, she had come for something serious, producing a grimoire. She asked Ryan to investigate whether at least half of its power to seal the Demon King still remained. Improbable as it seemed, there was always a chance he could return, and they needed to be ready. Back with the S-rank adventurers, the group studied their map. They were close now. Schwarz would be their next stop, and from there only a day's journey remained to the royal capital. But evening was falling, and Claire voiced her concern. Traveling at night meant risking an ambush by monsters. Speaking of which, Cross wonders if the princess's own creature enchantment magic wouldn't be enough to stop that from happening. But she explains it might not work in time if they were caught off guard. So, Lloyd expands his detection field to keep the journey moving forward, yet he feels an interference in his magic. Suddenly, everyone senses the arrival of a thick mist spreading rapidly through the area. Silica tries summoning her staff from storage magic to push it back, but nothing happens. Lloyd quickly assumes the fog is interfering with their magical power. Yui asks if it could be the work of a monster, but Claire has never heard of one capable of such a thing. The white mage agrees, pointing out that it must be the work of a demon. With that in mind, they sprint through the forest, desperate to escape before the heavy fog blinds them completely. Worse still, if a demon was behind this, it could only mean an ambush, so under no circumstance would they allow themselves to be left vulnerable. They make a dash straight toward the city of Schwarz. Meanwhile, Ryan studies the grimoire and confirms that magical power still lingers inside it, a residue left from Sybil's contamination. Merlin interprets it as the last will or final testament of the legendary mage who had passed away. Ryan doesn't understand why, so the human reminds her of young Lloyd, the boy she once took in and trained in the remote mountains. One day, purely by chance, Lloyd touched the grimoire and revealed himself to be compatible with it. That was when the master realized the child carried enough power to be chosen, just like her and Sybil before him. Ryan remarks that reaching such a level is far from common. But her partner knew that very well. That's why she did everything in her power to push Lloyd to exceed every expectation, molding him into the one he was destined to become. The problem was that she treated raising a child the same way she would craft a spell, overlooking the boy's feelings most of the time, and that became her greatest regret, being far too harsh on him. Now Lloyd had left home, and here he was, escorting an imperial princess who had been kidnapped. The truth is, Merlin had stayed away from her pupil for far too long, and all she longed for now was to hear his voice again. Back with the white mage, Lloyd and his companions finally reach Schwarz, but the city is also swallowed in the same suffocating mist that haunted the forest. The streets are empty, so Lloyd casts an enhancement spell on Silica, enabling her to summon her staff and clear the fog with a wind field. The trick works, revealing figures that had been hiding within the haze: the great General Grist and several of his men, poised to strike. Claire immediately recognizes her assailant, though she manages to keep her composure. The general makes it clear that the beast woman still has her uses, and he orders his troops to seize the princess once more. Lloyd reacts quickly, boosting all of his allies' abilities. He instructs daggers to protect Claire, while Cross climbs one of the towers for a better vantage point with his bow. Finally, Yui conjures her sword and unleashes a new long-range technique she had only just mastered, cutting down enemies in her path. Lloyd warns Silica not to use her explosion spell, worried it might kill innocent townsfolk, so she switches to Fireball, striking down others instead. From above, Cross's aim is razor sharp. Even when opponents raised magical shields, the archer's newly learned technique, firing multiple arrows in rapid succession, gradually wore them down until the barriers shattered. But once the weaker enemies were dispatched, and he set his sights on Grist, the general revealed a hide tougher than steel, breaking arrows as if they were twigs. Yui repeated her attack, but it barely slowed him down. The demon marched straight toward the group, unfazed. That gave Grist the opening to close in on Claire, but Daggers was ready. He blocked the crushing blow with his shield. Yui seized the moment to strike from behind, but her blade stopped short, intercepted by Grist's defenses, and she was slammed back by a brutal counter. Lloyd realized the truth: Grist was protected by a magical armor. His sharp insight made the demon suspect that this boy might be none other than the hero of Ishtar. With that thought, Grist leapt to strike the party, but Silica responded instantly with an explosion, taking advantage of the fact that the enemy was airborne and away from the houses. A colossal blast tore through the air, shaking the battlefield, yet even that wasn't enough to wound him. Grist stood untouched, brimming with confidence. To make matters worse, more of his underlings appeared, surrounding the group and swelling the general's arrogance all the more. But then, out of nowhere, a tidal wave of ice swept across the battlefield, freezing Grist's soldiers in place and forming a protective barrier around the S-rank adventurers. From atop a rooftop, Celian orchestrated the attack, ensuring Claire would not be taken. Watching from afar, Michel realized things weren't going well. He considered thickening the mist. In that moment, the legendary alchemist Merlin's partner appeared. As he put it himself, he was there to cut evil at its root. The fog hindered his plans, and it needed to be cleared immediately. Michel questioned if his foe could truly manage that, but the alchemist replied with confidence it would be simple for him to unravel the enemy's tricks. Though he carried himself with an air of superiority, Michel matched him, standing firm and ready for the inevitable clash. Meanwhile, Celian stepped closer to the adventurers, scoffing at them as nothing but weaklings, claiming they were only getting in his way. Trying hard to keep her foul mouth in check, Claire explains that this is the hero of the ice crystals. Yui instantly remembers that this so-called hero isn't exactly famous for his good behavior. Speaking of which, Celian complains that the Holy Nation doesn't even recognize him by that title, not that he cares for such a ridiculous thing anyway. Right then, Claire notices that he's carrying a bag she had made for him as a childhood birthday present. That little detail gives Yui the perfect chance to tease him, especially after all that pointless arrogance he had just put on display. Naturally, the guy only gets even more aggressive when he snaps at the mockery. Meanwhile, Grist breaks free from Celian's ice and charges back into the fight. Arrogant and unruly as always, the hero of the ice crystals orders the adventurers to stay out of his way so they don't ruin everything, then immediately tries to freeze the enemy general's feet. Once he shrugs off the attempt, Grist notices something unusual. His opponent doesn't need incantations. He uses his body instead of a staff, and he doesn't freeze when channeling ice magic. Clearly, this makes him more than just a simple beastman. Explaining that he was born with resistance to that element, Celian cuts the chatter short and goes for a brutal strike, forcing the demon to dodge at the very last second. Yui and Silica step forward, offering to help, but the beastman insists they stay out of this fight. At the same time, Michel thought she had already defeated the alchemist with a single skill, only to realize she had badly underestimated him. He stood there completely unharmed. As she had feared, he was capable of seeing through his opponent's tricks. Watching the potions he used to nullify her spells, Michel finally realizes she's facing a legendary alchemist. Back in the city, Celian bombards Grist with an obscene amount of ice while cursing him every which way, his insults so outrageous that even his allies feel offended on the demon's behalf. That's when Yui understands why this man isn't accepted as a hero, and Daggers adds that he causes so much chaos on the battlefield that it's simply impossible to fight alongside him. Lloyd, on the other hand, focuses on something else. The fact that Grist still hasn't struck back. It doesn't take long for him to notice that the demon had been gathering magical power in his fist all this time, preparing to unleash a single devastating blow. Realizing what's about to happen, the S-rank adventurers scramble for cover until Grist and Celian collide fist to fist midair, unleashing a massive explosion across Schwarz. Hearing the blast, the legendary alchemist turns toward the city and admits to himself that he underestimated Michel. He never imagined his opponent had such an important trump card. Taking advantage of the distraction, Michel seizes the moment and flees the battle. At the heart of the explosion, Lloyd pushes away the debris and grins when he spots Daggers still alive. Using his detection magic, he confirms that all his allies are safe, except he can't sense Claire or Celian. And then, amid the chaos, the princess appears, already in the clutches of the Grand General Grist, with his captive secured. The demon escapes aboard an allied vessel that swoops in to carry him and his prize away. Breaking free from the rubble that had pinned him down, Celian stomped the ground hard, conjuring a massive platform of ice that shot straight into the sky, carrying him closer to the princess's kidnapper. But just as the Beastman was about to reach Claire, the ice buckled under its own height and shattered, sending Celian plummeting. To prevent disaster, Lloyd quickly called on Silica to summon the breath of wind, cushioning his allies' fall. Though saved, Celian's foul temper got the better of him. Scowling up at the enemy above, he snapped at the legendary S-rank group to stay out of his way, as if their presence alone might ruin everything. Lloyd, calm as ever, reminded the hothead that their opponent was airborne with an important hostage, and this wasn't the time to lose composure. Without Celian even noticing, the white mage healed him in an instant. His body simply felt whole again, as though nothing had happened. When the others pressed him for the next move, Lloyd finally spoke. He had a plan. Celian, skeptical, demanded to know what in the world this man could possibly do in such a situation. The adventurers shot the question back at him. If even ice, his specialty, hadn't worked. Then what exactly did he think he could do to save Claire? They added, almost teasing, that it was Lloyd who had told them to act when Cillian was falling. So maybe the hothead should cool off a little. Lloyd, serene, assured them he only wanted to help and promised he'd do everything possible not to get in the way. Cillian's expression remained distant, yet there was a flicker in his eyes, a reluctant trust in those words. Meanwhile, high above, Grist marveled at the craft he was aboard. If they could fly, he mused, they could strike anywhere on the continent. Michelle explained that this wasn't a warship at all, but a mobile research lab, and that using it to ferry soldiers was highly irregular. Grist pushed back, insisting this vessel could have turned the tide in the assault on Ishtar. But Michelle revealed the truth. This was an experimental creation, made possible only recently when he finished developing a power source vast enough to move the entire craft. That source? A fragment of the previous Demon King's body, torn apart in that great battle. Michelle had managed to acquire it and was stunned to find it still held lingering magic. By analyzing its vital core, he built a device capable of generating infinite magical power. He named it the Lament of the Dead King. Horrified, Grist demanded to know what kind of deranged mind could conceive such a thing. Michelle, with a thin smile, confessed that he wished to create a true monster with fearsome might. His ambition was so great he could barely contain himself at the thought, especially considering the profit it might bring. Suddenly, alarms blared through the ship. Outside, Cillian was springing from one ice platform to another, rapidly ascending toward the vessel, desperate to reach Claire. Behind him, the S-rank adventurers mirrored his climb. Yet Michelle only laughed at the sight, eager to see how things would unfold. Cillian himself was astonished to learn Lloyd could reverse gravity magic. The white mage clarified that the field was weak and limited in range, they needed footholds to keep ascending. From the forest below, the legendary alchemist, watching the allies close in on the enemy craft, finally stepped forward to join the fray. The moment the intruders set foot on the ship, Grist's confidence began to waver, while Claire's eyes widened in shock at Cillian working alongside others. As the demon general climbed the steps to the deck, he found his foes already in position, weapons drawn. At his first strike, Lloyd instantly cast buffs to empower his allies. Cillian lunged first, dodging the general's blow and retaliating with a sword slash across his back. But the beast man's blade shattered against the opponent's impenetrable magic barrier. Lloyd gave his comrades a subtle nod. Time for the plan. Silica unleashed a cloud of acid mist, engulfing the demon. Grist scoffed and blew it away, only for Yui to dart in with a surprise strike, which also fizzled against the barrier. At the same time, Cross fired a flurry of arrows, and Cillian attacked again with another ice blade. Yet every move was effortlessly blocked by Grist's shield. Growing smug, the general sneered that none of them could touch him after all. He was one of the Demon King's great generals. Smirking, he asked if Cillian truly thought he could win. Cillian's reply was simple. No. The demon lunged with a devastating punch meant to end it all, only for daggers to intercept, raising his shield just in time. Undeterred, Grist swung with his other fist, but to his horror, his hand froze solid and exploded into fragments. Shocked and in pain, he couldn't understand what had happened. The truth was brutal. His arm had necrotized. Lloyd had nullified his sense of pain, preventing him from realizing it sooner. The general's armor was nearly indestructible. True, but only against attacks he could actually see. That was the shield's fatal flaw. Lloyd had guessed it during their last battle on land, though Grist had blocked Cillian's ice. His hair had still frozen. That clue led the white mage to form a hypothesis, and this fight proved him right. Most attacks the general could perceive, but not the cold air streaming invisibly from Cillian's breath. That freezing wind, hidden within Silica's mist, had slipped past his defenses and destroyed his arm. All the relentless strikes before had been nothing but a diversion, keeping him occupied while the real attack found its mark. Cross and Yui mocked him as the truth sank in. This is what teamwork looks like, they said. Something Grist clearly had no grasp of, especially since he thought he could take on half a dozen's ranks alone, armed with nothing but blind faith in God and a second-rate magic shield. At last, Lloyd demands that the demon hand Claire over. Cillian complains that he should have been the one to say that line, but unwilling to be outdone, Grist bolts back toward the cabin, with his rivals immediately chasing after him. Even though Michelle's experimental monsters aren't ready yet, the general sees no other choice but to unleash them on his enemies. With that decision made, he breaks the locks restraining the beasts, and they quickly overrun the place so much so that even Grist himself is attacked by one of them, making it crystal clear that things have spiraled completely out of control. Michelle had been against releasing the creatures since they were still in the testing phase, but once the damage was already done, he seized the opportunity to continue his research in real time. He sets up a device that emits sound through a magic stone to study how the animals react. Meanwhile, Cillian shatters Claire's prison of ice and frees the princess. During all this, Michel convinces himself that his experiment is working, because the monsters seem focused on his enemies rather than rampaging at random. The adventurers ready their weapons for battle, but Claire herself steps in to stop them. She walks forward and begins to sing her ancient magic song, known to soothe the hearts of beasts and prevent the cabin from descending into a bloodbath. The melody echoes through the ears of every living being in the room. The beast woman's beautiful voice eases the souls of the creatures, who only moments ago were consumed by grotesque bloodlust. Their eyes, once blazing with sinister red, slowly begin to clear. Michel, however, obsessed with his experiments, cares little that the monsters are no longer behaving as he intended. All he does is record their new reactions with fanatical focus. The peace doesn't last. The ship begins to destabilize, shaking violently. Missing one of his hands, Grist loses balance almost instantly and brushes against the compartment holding the Demon King's fragment. The contact sparks a magical reaction that affects the general directly. Michel suspects a resonance between those monsters and the beast woman's magic. But when Grist's irises suddenly vanish, the human scientist realizes what's happening. Claire's ancestral magic is causing the Demon King's life source to spiral out of control. Knowing the artifact will explode if nothing is done, Michel removes it from the compartment. Without its energy source, the airship plunges into a free fall. Still, the passengers don't feel the full brunt of the descent. Lloyd is holding the situation together with his gravity magic. Suddenly, Grist begins acting bizarrely, as though possessed, demanding the life source for himself. Curious to see what would happen, Michel hands it over. The instant the magical item fuses with a demon, an energy sphere bursts forth, pulling in nearby monsters with a powerful gravitational field. It revitalizes the Demon King's source and builds into terrifying strength. Claire covers her ears as the cries of the creatures being sucked in overwhelm her. Their shrieks of fear cut into her like physical pain. While everyone else stares in horror at the nightmarish reaction of that growing orb, Michel remains consumed by his obsession, treating the whole catastrophe as nothing more than data for his experiment, blind to the danger it truly represents. Once the sphere gathers enough energy, it transforms into a chimera, its central face belonging to none other than Grist. Lloyd had read about such abominations in his mentor's books, beings where multiple lives are fused into one body. With tears in her eyes, Claire thinks only of the animals suffering inside the monstrous vessel, whom she calls her children. Overcome with mania, Michel spreads his arms and shouts with joy at the outcome of everything he had orchestrated to reach this moment. But the chimera owed the scientist nothing. Whether driven by instinct or conscious malice, Grist lashes out with his massive claws and delivers a fatal strike. Michel, powerless to react, collapses. Before his final breath, he smiles, proud of the twisted legacy his work has left behind. From that moment, the S-rank allies take their positions, fully aware that this foe stands on a level above any they've ever faced. Meanwhile, in a distant tower, Ryan invites Merlin to spend the night in her quarters, but the human declines, complaining that there's no liquor there. Suddenly, both women sense the sudden appearance of the legendary alchemist. The beast woman lights up with joy at seeing Will again, an old friend she hadn't met in ages, but she can't understand how he got inside without magic. The alchemist explains that he used a nasal concoction that knocked the guards unconscious when they inhaled it. Even so, Merlin figures it must be something urgent for him to show up like this. When Will confirms it is, the mage asks Ryan to lend them one of her rooms. The beast woman insists again that there's no alcohol, but the human makes it clear this isn't the time for drinking. Back aboard Michel's crashing skyship, knowing the chimera could strike at any moment, Daggers asks Lloyd for a physical enhancement. Lloyd complies, reinforcing the tank's body. As expected, the massive creature charges straight for the frontline warrior and delivers a blow so devastating that the shield bearer realizes he can't endure many more like it. As the ship hurtles downward, Cross snaps at Lloyd's unnerving calmness in such a dire situation. The archer only wants to escape, but Claire's concern is with the children absorbed into the chimera, their lives trapped in that grotesque body. Cillian tries to convince the princess there's no saving them now. To make matters worse, the chimera blocks the exit of the cabin. Cillian prepares to strike, but Claire stops him, pleading for the creatures inside. Even so, Yui and Cross refuse to sit around waiting to be pulverized when the ship hits ground. They charge the enemy with everything they've got. With both of its feral heads, the chimera lashes out the lion, unleashing fire, while the wolf exhales a chilling breath. Together, the two forces swirl into a raging cyclone, a living shield that hurls back every enemy strike. From that moment on, the band of adventurers recoils from their failed assault, while Lloyd struggles to piece together an escape before the ship comes crashing down. Merlin and Will approached the location of the ship through a teleportation spell crafted by the alchemist. The sorceress used her magic to locate their allies and to hear what they were saying to one another as they fought. Once she found them, the pair was able to draw even closer. Inside the vessel, Silica tried to strike the chimera, but the creature was far too powerful to be harmed by any kind of attack. Each failed attempt only weakened the hope that the adventurers might escape alive. Since using magic against the enemy wasn't enough, Lloyd decided to improvise with a risky strategy, one that might be their only chance of survival. He quickly ordered his companions to stay near the ship's wall, then cancelled the spell that controlled gravity. The result was immediate. The ship began to fall violently, and as a consequence, everyone was thrown to the floor, including the chimera, which now slipped and opened a path to escape. Without hesitation, Lloyd ordered everyone to get out as fast as they could, and that's exactly what they did. Left behind as the last one, the support mage was forced to endure a deafening spell from the chimera, which joined its two heads together to unleash an attack that combined the elements of air and fire. Despite the overwhelming power, and already close to the exit, the boy managed to conjure a magical shield that absorbed the impact, though with immense difficulty. Outside, Cillian attempted to conjure an ice platform that could steady the companions as they fell. However, the explosion of the chimera's magic melted the platform almost instantly. To make matters worse, the monster flew out of the wreckage in a rage, threatening the adventurers, who saw no other option but to leap from the ship however they could. Faced with grave danger, Cillian at least had the calm and the time to try again. He conjured a platform large enough to hold all the warriors, yet one final detail was still missing to soften their fall. Remembering that he needed Lloyd's help for this part, Silica called out to the mage, asking him to cast a support spell to intensify the force of her wind breath. It would have to be launched with absolute precision at just the right moment, so the peak of the pressure would strike when the ice platform was about to touch the ground. The others watched anxiously, their eyes on Lloyd as he searched for the timing. At last, he recognized the right moment and shouted for the sorceress to do her part. Silica released the spell, and the burst of air acted like a brake. It gave the party just enough time to jump from the platform before it crashed against the ground. With everyone safe, Silica's heart swelled with happiness that she had managed to do everything right. Lloyd gave her a vote of confidence, confirming more and more his role as the true leader of the group. Yet even though he was so useful to everyone, whenever his comrades praised him, Lloyd still considered himself insufficient. By now, however, the others understood his nature, and they began to see his self-doubt as something natural. A little apart from the group, Cillian spoke with Claire. He confessed that he had always fought alone his entire life, and that it was always better for him not to have the company of others, since their presence seemed to hinder more than help under any circumstance. However, after meeting this boy named Lloyd, everything he believed had been turned upside down. Cillian admitted the young man was truly special, and Claire agreed wholeheartedly. Even so, the battle was far from over. The ship, plummeting rapidly, finally crashed against the ground and forced the group to run as fast as they could to avoid being crushed. The weight and size of the vessel unleashed an enormous explosion, and the violence of the flames made Claire weep at the thought of her children trapped inside the chimera's body. Yet to her surprise, the terrible enemy was still alive. Not only that, because of some unknown reaction, the beast had doubled in size. Realizing the situation, Lloyd did not hesitate. He ordered everyone to flee into the forest as fast as possible. At that moment, Will and Merlin arrived in the area. The sorceress cast her spell once again to listen to the young adventurers as they spoke among themselves, hidden within the forest. The group was filled with confusion about how a single creature could embody so many species at once. Lloyd had a theory. As Michelle had mentioned earlier on the ship, there seemed to be a resonance between the animals and Claire's ancestral power. That resonance triggered a sinister reaction, awakening the Demon King's vital source. Once awakened, the source longed for a body in which to revive. The circumstances caused it to absorb every animal in the area, thus creating the dreaded chimera. No one knew the exact reason why the monster pursued the adventurers with such fury, but Lloyd suspected it was because Grist was still inside its body, which meant the chimera still carried the desires that the demon general had held in life, above all, the desire to claim Claire for himself. Daggers suggested that Lloyd cast a concealment spell to hide the princess, but the support mage doubted it would work. The creature would keep chasing them, even if they managed to escape for a while. So Cillian spoke the obvious truth. The only way to escape was to kill the chimera. Seeing the anguish on the beast woman's face, Silica asked if there was any way to keep the animals trapped within the chimera alive. After a few seconds of reflection, Lloyd said he believed there might be a chance. Claire would need to sing again, but this time she would be aided by a support spell that would drive her magic directly into the Demon King's vital source, reaching the animals inside. With luck, it might allow them to break free. Cillian was certain it would go wrong, but Lloyd responded with the most fitting question for the moment. Do you have a better idea? Clinging to even the faintest hope of saving the animals, Claire declared she was more than willing to try. And so the strategy was settled. As the Chimera drew closer, the adventurers discussed every detail of their plan. Once their roles were set, there was nothing left to do. It was time to act. However, Merlin finally arrives to prevent her apprentice from doing it. After all, there is a decisive factor in this strategy that the support mage is unaware of. Unfortunately, those who meddle with forbidden ancestral magic, without being true heirs of that power, will inevitably end up dead. And that person could very well be Lloyd. Disagreeing that this would happen, the boy argues that he realized something very important after leaving his master's side and meeting his new companions. With them, Lloyd discovered his own ability and talent. Without them, he would never have believed himself capable of attempting what he now proposes. In this case, even though there is a clear danger in someone who is not an heir making use of ancestral magic, he has faith that somehow he can surpass expectations. The mage doesn't understand how, but Lloyd feels it within himself. Merlin reminds him that she taught him never to be overconfident. Yet the boy insists this is not arrogance, this is simply the awareness of what one is capable of doing. No more and no less. It was precisely this awareness, he adds, that made him realize just how hard it is to surpass a mentor. Merlin is left speechless in the face of the discussion with her apprentice, and when the Chimera approaches and the adventurers advance to carry out their mission, she does not try to stop them. On the contrary, she remains frozen, reflective, unable to accept it. She mutters that her apprentice is truly going to lend support to an ancestral spell, something that will certainly result in the same tragedy she once endured in her own past. One way or another, Lloyd has chosen his fate. When the enemy comes within range, Cillian hurls a rain of ice spears that distract the beast. Opening the gap, the support mage needs to leap onto the Chimera's body and drive his staff into it. Once he does, Claire begins her chanting once again. Lloyd then sends forth a magical circle of strengthening that gathers the potency of the ancestral spell and channels it back into the mage staff. With all that power, the young human feels the pressure bearing down on his body in a nearly unbearable weight. Still, he stands firm and continues the process. Because of this, the Chimera's body begins to split apart into countless beams of light. These beams spiral upward and are drawn into a black hole forming in the sky. Before long, the creature is entirely sucked into that strange, surreal rift. Even so, a great problem occurs together with the success of vanquishing the enemy. Just as the Chimera was pulled into that vortex, Lloyd suffers the same fate, and his allies can do nothing to prevent it. Now, the mage finds himself in an expanse filled with nothingness, a vast whiteness that suggests the absence of all things. Only a few elements disturb the scene. First, Grist disintegrates and becomes part of the void, while Lloyd watches his own body separated from himself, floating in that incomprehensible space. In the midst of this, a voice emerges, explaining that the boy's body and mind are starting to part ways. Strangely, the adventurers outside the vortex can hear it too, though they cannot identify whose mysterious voice it is. But Merlin, attentive to its tone, no longer has any doubt. It is Sybil. According to the voice, ancestral magic is the inheritance of a prosperous race from a distant past, a people whose very existence transcended human knowledge as it is known today. At the height of their strength, this race was able to create spells that altered the very perception of space and time. The impact was so dangerous it threatened the entire world. Because of this, they forbade the use of those spells. At the same time, knowing they would be needed at certain moments, the race allowed only a chosen few to use the forbidden techniques on behalf of the rest of civilization. Those privileged ones are today called heirs. Likewise, to prevent others from seizing such power, there was punishment for any non-heir who tried to reproduce the ancestral spells. The moment someone attempted to activate such a spell, their magical energy would spiral out of control and they would die. Hearing this, Lloyd remembers that once someone tried to do just that. Sybil confirms it, explaining that he himself had used ancestral magic during his ancient battle against the Demon King. On that day, despite the overwhelming struggle, he and the legendary mages managed to corner the enemy leader. Victory was drawing closer with each moment, but the impatience to end the war swiftly caused the human mages to lose concentration, and that lapse opened the gap the Demon King needed to play his final card: self-destruction. The magical energy within that being was so staggering that his self-imposed annihilation was enough to devastate the entire civilization. Faced with the end of all things, Sybil chose to sacrifice his life, bending the limits between life and death to revive everyone who had been killed in the process. The price, of course, was the death of the legendary mage himself. As he listens to this story, Lloyd watches his outer body being pulled into a black energy that spreads through the whiteness. Sybil explains that the boundaries of order are closing, and that as one final intervention, he will delay the punishment meant for anyone who uses ancestral magic. In that case, Lloyd will be able to wield the forbidden art without dying from it, but he will only be able to break free if he understands the feeling that lies behind it. At Sybil's command, the young mage presses his hand against his chest. This triggers a magical reaction that sweeps him into vivid memories of his experiences alongside his companions. Outside the rift, the S-rank adventurers think among themselves about how Lloyd has always helped them in every way possible. Now it is their turn to repay him. With that, they all begin shouting the support mage's name, as though trying to call him back from within the black hole. Hearing their voices, Lloyd looks one last time at Sybil and leaves the absolute void to return to reality. Fear takes hold of him as he drifts through that non-existent mass, especially as the whiteness transforms into an oppressive darkness. Terrified, the mage shouted to his companions, who cried back at him, guiding him somehow toward the light. As that astral journey came to an end, Lloyd finally managed to return to the material world. The room instantly filled with the emotions of his companions, while Merlin offered her gratitude for the last intervention of her eternal partner, Sybil. The next day, inside the castle of the Foras Empire, the group was stunned to discover that Lloyd's mentor was none other than the great sage Merlin herself. The sheer absurdity of it was so overwhelming that everyone assumed the boy was out of his mind for never mentioning something that important. Truth be told, Lloyd simply had no idea just how legendary his master really was, which only made the whole story even more unbelievable. Cutting through all the chatter, Cillian stepped forward to apologize to Claire for something significant. In the chaos of battle, he had lost the bag she'd given him as a gift. The man was visibly shaken, but the woman only smiled and promised to give him another. Soon after, the group met with the King of Foras, and as a reward for all their efforts, the adventurers were granted a mansion in the capital where they could live and work together. Suddenly, Ryan appeared out of nowhere and, without a hint of shame, sniffed Lloyd up close. Amidst everyone's confusion, the little beast girl explained that his magical scent was strikingly similar to Merlin's. Speaking of which, Merlin herself soon appeared to clarify that Ryan was her friend. Being a beast woman, she could distinguish the aura of people's energy. Ryan added that while the essence of master and apprentice was different, their control over magic was exactly the same. Lloyd's teammates grew excited at this revelation, even if he, as usual, couldn't understand why. After all, Merlin wasn't just anyone, she was the great sage, a member of the legendary party that once fought the Demon King. Finally, Merlin asked her apprentice what he wanted to do next, return home with her, or continue on his own path. Lloyd chose to stay with his friends, since the king had requested that they remain in the capital a while longer. Besides, he didn't just want to master support magic, he wanted to learn every type of spell. Hearing this, Ryan remarked that the boy really was just like his master, and nothing she could have said would have stung him more, remembering all too well how Merlin had always been with him. After the meeting, on the outskirts of Foras, Merlin apologized to Will for all the trouble she had caused, but the legendary alchemist didn't mind the effort, as long as it was for someone like her. Speaking of which, she reminded him that this war was far from over, and the Demon King's return could happen at any moment, which meant, of course, they would need Lloyd again when that day came. Meanwhile, the heroes were delighted with their new mansion. They remarked that ever since Lloyd had joined them, everything had gone their way, and he had even been the one to save Ishtar after walking away unscathed from casting an ancient spell. Lloyd, however, insisted he didn't see himself at such a high level and admitted his lack of skill. Once again, his friends burst into laughter at their comrades' ridiculously unbalanced humility, but this time, as expected, they understood.